Welcome. This is Kingdom in Context. I'm Sean, your host, and this is our Saturday devotional that we call Torah Portions. I'm so excited for you guys to join us today. We're going to be picking back up our study in Genesis chapters 41 through 44. We got some fun things to talk about in these chapters. And I just want to say a big shout out and hello to everyone in the chat that's already watching. We've got quite a few people here that we recognize their names. We appreciate you guys showing up from week to week in the chat, participating, being of good cheer, asking good questions. Hopefully you guys are ready for fun and interactive Torah portions. We got a couple guests to join us with the reading and discussion today. Without further ado, we'll bring them on. So we have our brother Joshua. Welcome, brother.
How's it going, man?
Yeah, thanks for coming back. Good to have you back. And we also have our brother Wes Blaze Jones.
Happy Sabbath. Good to be back on with you, brother. Always a blessing.
Yeah. Shabbat shalom to you as well. And for everyone out there today that is celebrating the Sabbath, we just hope you guys have a wonderful day of peace. We hope that this is complimentary to that, so you get a chance to just dive into the Word, get to know your Heavenly Father a little bit better, and His wonderful instructions for how we can enjoy this life before we get to eternity. So I think without further ado, we should just jump right in. You guys ready?
Let's do it.
I am.
All right. And Wes Blaze, would you like to take for Genesis 41 this week?
I'd be happy to.
All right.
Genesis 41, starting verse 1. After 2 full years had passed, Pharaoh had a dream. He was standing beside the Nile when 7 crows, sleek and well-fed, came up from the river and began to graze among the reeds. After them, 7 other cows, sickly and thin, came up from the Nile and stood beside the well-fed cows on the bank of the river. And the cows that were sickly and thin devoured the 7 sleek, well-fed cows. Then Pharaoh woke up, but he fell back asleep and dreamed a second time. 7 heads of grain, plump and ripe, came up on one stalk. After them, 7 other heads of grain sprouted, thin and scorched by the east wind. And the thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 plump, ripe ones. Then Pharaoh awoke and realized it was a dream. In the morning, his spirit was troubled, so he summoned all the magicians and wise men of Egypt. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but no one could interpret them for him. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, "Today I recall my failures. Pharaoh was once angry with his servants, and he put me and the chief baker in the custody of the captain of the guard. One night, both the chief baker and I had dreams, and each dream had its own meaning. Now a young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us individually. And it happened to us just as he had interpreted. I was restored to my position, and the other man was hanged. So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, who was quickly brought out of the dungeon. After he had shaved and changed his clothes, he went in before Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I had a dream, and no one can interpret it. But I have heard it said of you that you, when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." I got it. "I myself cannot do it," Joseph replied, "but God will give Pharaoh a sound answer." Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "In my dream, I was standing on the bank of the Nile, when 7 cows, well-fed and sleek, came up from the river and began to graze among the reeds. After them, 7 other cows, sickly, ugly, and thin, came up. I have never seen such ugly cows in all the land of Egypt. Then the thin, ugly cows devoured the 7 well-fed cows that were there first. When they had devoured them, however, no one could tell that they had done so. Their appearance was as ugly as it had been before. Then I awoke. In my dream, I also saw 7 heads of grain, plump and ripe, growing on a single stalk. After them, 7 other heads of grain sprouted, withered, thin, and scorched by the east wind. And the thin heads of grain swallowed the 7 plump ones. I told this dream to the magicians, but no one could explain it to me." At this, Joseph said to Pharaoh, "The dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 ripe heads of grain are 7 years. The dreams have the same meaning. Moreover, the 7 thin, ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, and so are the 7 worthless heads of grain scorched by the east wind. They are 7 years of famine. It is just as I said to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. Behold, 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt, but 7 years of famine will follow them. Then all the abundance in the land of Egypt will be forgotten, and the famine will devastate the land. The abundance in the land will not be remembered, since the famine that follows it will be so severe. Moreover, because the dream was given to Pharaoh in two versions, the matter has been decreed by God, and he will carry it out shortly. Now, therefore, Pharaoh should look for a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh take action and appoint commissioners over the land to take a fifth of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. Under the authority of Pharaoh, let them collect all the excess food from these good years, that they may come and lay up the grain to be preserved as food in the cities. This food will be a reserve for the land during the 7 years of famine to come upon the land of Egypt. Then the country will not perish in the famine. This proposal pleased Pharaoh and all of his officials. So Pharaoh asked them, "Can we find anyone like this man in whom the Spirit of God abides?" Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my house, and all my people are to obey your commands. Only with regard to the throne will I be greater than you." Pharaoh also told Joseph, "I hereby place you over all the land of Egypt." Then Pharaoh removed the signet ring from his finger, put it on Joseph's finger, clothed him in garments of fine linen, and placed a gold chain around his neck. He had Joseph ride in his second chariot with men calling out before him, "Bow the knee." So he placed him over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh declared to Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, but without your permission, no one in all the land of Egypt shall lift his hand or foot." Pharaoh gave Joseph the name Zaphanath-Paneah, and he gave him Asenath, daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, to be his wife. And Joseph took charge of all the land of Egypt. Now Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and Joseph left Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout the land of Egypt. During the 7 years of abundance, the land brought forth bountifully. During those 7 years, Joseph collected all the excess food in the land of Egypt and stored it in the cities. In every city, he laid up the food from the fields around it. So Joseph stored up grain in such abundance, like the sand of the sea, that he stopped keeping track of it, for it was beyond measure. Before the years of famine arrived, 2 sons were born to Joseph by Asenath, daughter of Potiphera, priest of On. Joseph named the firstborn Manasseh, saying, "God has made me forget all my hardship and all my father's household." And the second son he named Ephraim, saying, God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. When the 7 years of abundance in the land of Egypt came to an end, the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had said. And although there was famine in every country, there was food throughout the land of Egypt. When extreme hunger came to all the land of Egypt and the people cried out to Pharaoh for food, he told all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph and do whatever he tells you." When the famine had spread over all the land, Joseph opened up all the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. And every nation came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain because the famine was so severe all over the earth.
All right. Thank you, Wes Blaze.
That was a long one.
It was
Yeah.
a little bit.
Nice lengthy portion there. So what are some first thoughts that come to you guys? Josh, what about you, brother?
Well, the first thing that I really love in this is how Pharaoh puts Joseph in charge, and some of the things that he does. He says, as for, you, nobody will be above you, and he puts his signet ring on. And I kind of like the symbolism of the ring, because if I'm not mistaken, isn't the ring also what has the seal for when they mark something as like coming from the king or having the authority of the king?
That was my understanding for the most part. Yeah, most dignitaries, princes, governors, it was like a little bulla inscription on the other side of the ring, and then they would,
it's like a physical representation of agency.
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I love that. Love that part of it.
That way, if you got to punch somebody, you're just going to leave that seal on their forehead.
You've been knocked out by the king.
That's right.
We see the writing style Genesis is famous for, right? Then expounding, giving details or a summary, and then goes back and gives more details. But also, I can't help but notice they're preparing for the famine, which it reminds me of like how often it's said that the Torah portions sometimes have like an uncanny resemblance to current real world events. And I can't help but notice like a parallel to the situation on the world stage of today, right? In preparing for the times to come, both of famine of food and of the word potentially or inevitably.
Yeah. Actually, I know some guys that are actually doing that right now.
Mm-hmm.
So that's interesting.
It makes me grateful, to the Father that we have the stability and the opportunity that we do have now, to store up the necessities and study up on the word and store treasures in heaven.
Kind of like that unintended benefit of being in the land of your enemies, so to speak. A lot of people have compared modern day America to ancient Egypt as just as far as some of the overall practices that happen. We actually have pyramids on our money. We've got, the Eye of Ra on our money. You know what I'm saying? We've got all kinds of obelisks and domes and pyramid-like structures and designs all over this country. And even though while there's a huge amount of believers in this country that worship, the God of heaven and earth, they don't worship the gods of Egypt. They still are inside a system that they don't always agree with. Just like Joseph is in a system he didn't agree with. He's trying to make the best of it. But the unintended benefit of being in that system is the abundance that is being procured. And Joseph is being instructed or given the opportunity to turn that around for the good of everybody, whether all those other people really agree with his view on the creator of heaven and earth. So I think that's wonderful because we have that same opportunity today, right? We can take this abundance that's available to us while it's available to us, and we can do our best to make that available to more people in a more sustainable way. Joseph's going to be doing that over the next 7 years. And I think it's a wonderful parallel to modern times.
Well, I also think it's interesting too. I mean, when you were just mentioning, the obelisks and all the different things that would be, considered pagan practices. We've seen the same thing that happens, after the Israelites get out of Egypt, God has to re-instruct them on the Torah and the law and everything, because after being in that environment for 400 years, they've mixed too many things. They don't quite remember all the ways to follow Yahweh appropriately. And same things happening here.
That's right. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Well said. So for everyone following along at home, guys, we offer these Torah portion slides and all the information that's on these in a PDF form. We offer them for free on our Patreon. Link is in the video description for below. You do not have to be an actual supporting member of Patreon. You can actually go to the Patreon post at the link below to the posts on our Kingdom in Context Patreon page, and you can download these PDFs of these study materials every week. So I try to provide the weekly or the chapter summaries with each portion, so that if you're at home studying on your own with friends or family, you've got some good bullet points to talk about in a quick fashion. So here in Genesis 41, we just see that Pharaoh has two different dreams in one night. Both dreams disturbed him. The cupbearer remembered Joseph had accurately interpreted his dreams and tells Pharaoh about it. This is wonderful because this is kind of like last week, Joseph was a little sad because the cupbearer forgot about him. And I couldn't quite find exactly how long it had been since the cupbearer got out of prison and then into this moment here. So all I know is, Joseph's been in prison for, I'm going to say at least 2 years, because I was trying to do the math with what I was reading from Jubilees and Testament of 12 Patriarchs versus what we're going to read later in this portion today, where it says he's 30 years old he's 30 years old at this point when he's taken over. And so I was trying to do the math as far as him having spent 7 years with in Potiphar's household as his manager, versus he went down into Egypt at 17 years old. So that puts him about 24 years old by the time he goes to prison. And then he gets out in this moment and is made viceroy or second command of all of Egypt at 30 years old. So unless I'm missing something, it's about 6 years he was in prison, which is not cool. But apparently he was the prison manager really loved him. So he was kind of, taking charge in the prison and being a manager in the prison also. So this dude's got incredible managerial skills, and the Pharaoh recognizes this in this moment. How interestingly easy is it for Joseph to be like, oh, so here's what you should do. And you know what? You should find someone wise and able to carry this out. And so like, so you should find someone wise and discerning that should carry this out for you. You know what I'm saying? He's like freshly shaved, got some nice clothes on now, finally. So I just think it's great that Pharaoh's like, yep, you're the dude. If you can see this, if you can discern what my dream was, and you're definitely the guy. So after he interprets its dreams, Joseph interprets the dream to mean 7 years of agricultural abundance will precede 7 years of famine. Joseph offered a plan of action to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh recognized the wisdom Joseph possessed. So Pharaoh appointed Joseph as second command of Egypt. Joseph began carrying out the plan to prepare for the coming famine. He also gives Joseph an Egyptian name and also the daughter of the priest of On as his wife. And then his wife during this time gives birth to Manasseh and Ephraim. What do you guys think about the moment where he receives the daughter of the priest of On? Which is Heliopolis.
Her name is Heliopolis, you said?
No, I'm sorry. On, the city of On
okay.
is the city of Heliopolis, which is actually on the border of, like right on the River Nile Delta in the territory of Goshen.
Okay.
And this is why later he's going to give his family the territory of Goshen as well. But what do you guys think about this as him being a man trying to follow Yahweh, and he's given the daughter of an occultic priest?
I think there's an instruction that says not to do that, not to marry them, right? But I'd imagine it was kind of a honor of royalty that they recognized his authority as the viceroy of Egypt, right? So they thought that they were doing a good thing. Go ahead.
But he goes through with it. So, I mean, he has children with her, and they seem to be blessed. You know, I mean, Jacob, his father, when he blesses him, he blesses the two children instead of Joseph.
Sure.
So, that's
we're not told how old this lady is. I think her name's Asenath. We're not told how old she is. We're not told her backstory. We have no clue. We don't know if this was like the Canaanite daughters of the priests, where they were commonly the harlots at the temple. We don't know if that's her backstory or not. I'm just guessing. If Joseph had this kind of sway, he would have declined the offer if she was probably a former temple prostitute. But either way, he's definitely, it doesn't seem to change his devotion to Yahweh.
No, I like to think of it as he got her grafted in.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And it makes me wonder what kind of conversations are being had here, because, you know, that means he's now an authority over the priest of On to some degree. And that's an interesting dynamic, I should say, right? Because we're talking like ancient Egyptian priests. I mean, this guy's like trying to channel Anubis. So like, this is serious. Yeah. This is like back in ancient Egypt. Right. So I just makes me wonder, you know, like what kind of conversations are being had, because, we don't see at any point in this story his walk with the Father being diminished or hindered. It's not like the situation with Solomon, right, where his heart was swayed because he married the daughters of the foreign daughters, you know. So yeah, it's interesting.
Well, if anybody could have instructed her and showed her the way of Yahweh, it would have been Joseph, right?
Yeah. Like we kind of read last week, he was trying to do that with Potiphar's wife. Now I'm thinking that this is Potiphera. I don't know if that's a language issue here or if that's actually a different guy. There's just two different people with two different names, or the same name but two different people. What do you guys think?
Well, oh, sorry. Go ahead, Wes, please.
Oh, I was just gonna say I assumed it was the same person, but I don't know for sure.
Well, I've thought the same thing, but then I was reading the Testament of 12 Patriarchs that Potiphar's wife had no children, and Joseph ended up praying for her to have children. Isn't that correct? So if that was the case, then that would have to be a long time later, or as we were talking earlier, she would be really young at first, because that wouldn't make much sense if it was the same person, and unless Potiphar had multiple wives, but it doesn't say that. But
he did have multiple wives. He had a concubine. Was according to Testament 12 Patriarchs that was jealous with him. And actually this brings up, Hannibal asked last week in the chat, as we were reviewing that the Testament of Jubilees mentions that, I think it's also in Genesis, that Potiphar was a eunuch, but yet we see him mentioned, his wife having babies in the Testament of Joseph. So the obvious question a lot of people have is, well, wait a minute, is he a eunuch? I thought a eunuch was someone that couldn't have kids. Well, I don't know their actual ancient definition for eunuch, because I know that what Yeshua tells us is that some eunuchs are made that way, some are born that way, and others live that lifestyle for the kingdom of God. So if he, in all accounts, Jubilees, Testament of Joseph, and Genesis, Potiphar had a wife. I don't know why a eunuch would have a wife to begin with, if he's a eunuch in the tradition, in the sense that we're thinking, right? If we're thinking like he's got his member chopped off, because that was the ancient practice for a lot of cultures to make eunuchs. So I don't know if he was a eunuch in that regard, because he had a wife anyway, right? Mm-hmm. So unless it was just, what's that?
Sorry, couldn't it also be that he had the wife before he became a eunuch?
That's what I was going to say. There's a variety of things that we're not told. One option is what Wes Blaze just said. Another option is what we see described as in the Testament of Joseph, as his chastity was as if he was one of the eunuchs. So it makes me think that these guys were considered as eunuchs because they were proving themselves in the eyes of their master, which Potiphar would be under the reign of Pharaoh, to be as a eunuch because of they're not taking all the women in the royal court and sleeping with them. So I'm just, and again, I don't know exactly how they're using the term eunuch in all three different books, but in all three different books, he has a wife. So it's definitely not the way we're thinking of it, in my understanding. But he did apparently had 2 wives, and they were in competition with each other, according to the Testament of Joseph. And I agree with you, Josh, that the age seems odd, because if he was 24 when the time he was put to jail by Potiphar's wife, she'd already had 2 kids since then. He gets out when he's 30. That means the kids are less than 10 years old. He has Manasseh and Ephraim here. And this, even if it's at the latter end of the 7 years of abundance, then that's still, they're not even, I guess they would be 18 years old. I don't know, maybe it's slightly possible they could have been the daughters of the same person he was working in the household of, but I don't remember the Potiphar being described as the priest of anything. So I don't know if it's 2 different guys or not.
Somebody in the chat mentioned there's a text called The Story of Joseph and Asenath, that it answers all the questions we're talking about, apparently. I haven't heard of it, but might be worth a look into.
Yeah.
I can tell you one thing: if it was in fact Pharaoh's or Potiphar's daughter, the wife who wanted to be with Joseph, her daughter, that probably would have been a thorn in her side. Of, man, what the heck? For years I tried to get. And
then the daughter gets with him. Yeah.
Right.
Well, that would, and in some way that would almost make sense as a form of familiarity, right? If he was in their household as an older male person, servant, and this sense of familiarity would have been there. I see that, but either way. Until we have further study, I personally don't know if it's the same person, but I'm fascinated by the idea that, like, we're talking ancient Heliopolis, guys. Like, this is a big deal. This is besides Memphis, this was another capital area city where they had, the priests would live. This would be where, they've got all these structures built to Osiris and Ra and Set and Horus. And like, this was an occultic center. So I guess what's encouraging about all this to me is that this guy's living in the thick of it, like in the absolute thick of an occultic culture. And the Father's given him favor, which I love this, because it's the Torah. This is the Torah of God, right? This, he says in Leviticus 26, and in King Solomon repeats this in his prayer in 1 Kings 8, that when you're in the land of your enemies, if you continue to be faithful to Yahweh, he will give you favor in the eyes of your enemies. And that, even though Joseph went through some rough years, he's now going to step into the rest of his entire life a moment of favor in the land of his enemies. And I just think this is a beautiful fulfillment of covenant.
Into the thick of it.
That's right. That's right. I should have prepared the clip, but did you see Joseph? Into the thick of it. Into the thick of it.
Oh.
So yeah, when I was younger, my son was younger, we used to watch Backyardigans all the time. It was great. So anything else in this chapter, guys, you want to talk about?
Not that I can think
Anything that sticks out? No? All right. Josh, you want to take chapter 42?
Sure.
All right.
When Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why are you staring at one another? Look," he added, "I've heard that there is some grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us, so that we may live and not die." So 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain from Egypt. But Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he said, "I am afraid that harm might befall him." So the sons of Israel were among those who came to buy, since the famine had also spread to the land of Canaan. Now Joseph was ruler of the land. He was the one who sold the grain to all its people. So when his brothers arrived, they bowed down before him with their faces to the ground. And when Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them. But he treated them as strangers and spoke harshly to them. "Why have you come? Where have you come from?" he asked. "From the land of Canaan," they replied. "We are here to buy food." Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they didn't recognize him. And Joseph remembered his dreams about them and said, "You are spies. You have come to see if our land is vulnerable." "Not so, my lord," they replied. "Your servants have come to buy food. We are all sons of one man. Your servants are honest men, not spies." "No," he added, "you have come to see if our land is vulnerable." But they answered, "Your servants are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. The youngest is now with our father, and one is no more." Then Joseph declared, "Just as I said, you are spies. And this is how you will be tested. As surely as Pharaoh lives, you shall not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of your number to get your brother. The rest of you will be confined so that the truth of your words may be tested. If they are untrue, then as surely as Pharaoh lives, you are spies." So Joseph imprisoned them for 3 days. And on the third day he said to them, I fear God, so do this and you will live. If you are honest, leave one of your brothers in custody, while the rest of you go back and take grain to relieve the hunger of your households. Then bring the youngest brother to me so that your words can be verified, that you may not die." And to this they consented. Then they said to one another, "Surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw his anguish when he pleaded with us, but we would not listen. That is why this distress has come upon us." And Reuben responded, "Didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy? But you didn't listen. Now we must account for his blood." They didn't realize that Joseph understood them, since there was an interpreter between them. And he turned away from them and he wept. When he turned back, he spoke to them. He took Simeon from them and had him bound before their eyes. Then Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with the grain, to return each man silver to his sack, and to give them provisions for their journey. This order was carried out, and they loaded the grain onto their donkeys and they departed. At the place where they lodged for the night, one of them opened his sack to get feed for his donkey, and he saw the silver in the mouth of the sack. "My silver has been returned," he said to his brothers. "It is here in my sack." Their hearts sank and trembled. They turned to one another and said, "What is this that God has done to us?" When they reached their father Jacob in the land of Canaan, they described to him all that had happened to them. "The man who is lord of the land spoke harshly to us and accused us of spying on the country. But we told him, 'We are honest men, not spies. We are 12 brothers, sons of one father. One is no more, and the youngest is now with our father in the land of Canaan.' Then the man who is the lord of the land said to us, 'This is how I will know whether you are honest. Leave one brother with me, take food to relieve your hunger of your households, and go. But bring your youngest brother back to me, so I will know that you are not spies, but honest men. Then I will give your brother back to you, and you can trade in the land.' As they began emptying their sacks, there in each man's sack was his bag of silver. And when they and their father saw the bags of silver, they were dismayed. Their father Jacob said to them, 'You have deprived me of my sons. Joseph is gone, and Simeon is no more. Now you want to take Benjamin? Everything is going against me.' Then Reuben said to his father, 'You may kill my 2 sons if I fail to bring him back to you. Put him in my care, and I will return him.' But Jacob replied, 'My son will not go down there with you, for his brother is dead, and he alone is left. If any harm comes to him on the journey, you will bring my gray hair down to Sheol in sorrow.'"
All right. Thank you, brother.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So we've got interesting dynamic here with Joseph's interaction, how he takes Simeon, and then they all go back to the land of Canaan for, from what I can understand from all the parallel accounts, it's like a year. So Simeon is being held for like a year. What do you guys think about that?
A lot of time to think about what he'd done.
But why just him, right?
He was singled out for some odd reason, right? I think after reading the Testament of Simeon, I noticed a couple things that kind of stood out that made me think that they had, Joseph and Simeon had butted heads throughout childhood and life, and that there was a unique interaction there, relationship.
Yeah, and I think he said he suffered more guilt than the rest of them, because we're going to read about this a little bit later. But also in the Testament of Gad, he talks about he and Simeon seem to be like the main culprits in all this. Like they really wanted to kill Joseph, and it was Reuben and Judah that kind of diverted the plan to kill him into actually just selling him. And so Joseph is listening to all this conversation at the bottom of the well. You know what I'm saying? Like, and it talks that we're going to read here in a minute, where Simeon admits that, how much they heard Joseph crying out and pleading to them, and how much it tugged on their hearts. And but they still went through it. I mean, but as far as anger goes, it seems like Simeon and Gad, they really wanted to kill Joseph.
Yeah.
So this is, yeah.
Doesn't it say that he envied Joseph?
Yes.
Yeah.
Envy. Yeah. And also Gad, as well as a few of the other patriarchs, all admit and confess that there were unclean spirits taking part in influencing them to behave in that way.
Yep.
And that they all ended up repenting too, which is beautiful. I love Reuben's heart throughout it all. He's just like so upset about it.
Yeah, he really wanted to save Joseph and get him back to Jacob. But then by the time he got back to the well, they'd already sold him. And yeah, so there's like a whole backstory to this thing that we don't get in Genesis that just breaks my heart, because from what you read in Genesis, it looks like all 10 of the brothers just hated him and just wanted to just kill him, and decided to sell him instead, which doesn't make a lot of sense if you have malice to kill someone. And so you start to realize the plot to actually sell him was the other brothers trying to save him. And that's the interesting part, because that's Reuben and Judah standing up. But like, from my understanding, Levi's not even in the picture, because he's down at Bethel ministering the priesthood. And that means you've got, from what you put all the accounts together between Jubilees and Testament of Joseph, like there's only like 6 or 7 of the brothers involved in this process. And so it's not like all 10 of them, and not all 10 of them didn't uniformly want him to die or even want to sell him. So it's that same dynamic you see in life, where there's a couple of bad characters, and the other men in the group, if you don't stand up for what's right, the bad characters will rule and enforce the tyranny. You know what I mean? And that's where apparently Simeon and Gad were the main culprits.
Yeah.
So that's pretty rough.
Bad
and here's,
happen.
Where's Asher? Where's Zebulon? Where's, what's up with all these other dudes? I don't know if it was just a physical dominance thing, because apparently Simeon and Gad were like the strongest and the most violent of the brothers. So it's like, is it just simply they were intimidated? And, you got, Zebulon and Asher in the background, and a couple of other dudes that are just like, I can't take out Simeon, so I can't say anything. You know what I mean?
Well, but go ahead, Westways.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, it seems like regardless of what the different brothers thought or wanted to do, or who wanted to save him or whatever, Jacob still believes that his son is dead. So they must have united in telling the story to their father and keeping that secret this entire time.
Oh yeah. They're all implicit in the cover up. Again, that's just like they were implicit in the selling. They didn't, none of them went home and just told on whomever of the brothers were the main instigators of this. So they definitely all covered it up, and they all, in their own way, suffered for the lie for 20 years. For 20 years.
Yeah,
I couldn't imagine.
It just got worse and worse on their consciences, right? Bad things happen when good people stand by and let bad people do things, or let people make bad choices, right? Even if it's your own family. Mm-hmm. I loved it kind of cracked me up in verse 1 that Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, and he looked to his sons and he's like, what are y'all staring at each other for? What are y'all just standing around? Y'all found out there was food. It's a famine right now.
Yeah, like they're just having that, chat at the end of the day. They come in from their herds and they're like, yeah, we're running out of grain for the herds. So they're just looking at each other, and Jacob's sitting in the back row, the old patriarch, just being like, I can see him sitting by the fire, sitting on a stool, looking up, watching these dudes just talk about how they're slowly running out of grain and provisions. And he's like, what are you guys looking at each other for? Go get some food. Travel to some other land and buy some food. It is hilarious. Like an old man who has no filter anymore.
Yeah.
You can imagine they'd had conversations for a couple of nights, and he'd held his tongue for a little while. It's like, I can't take this anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. And that's something I thought about while even going over the study again, is because, man, when I do these, these actual Torah portion study materials, I get to go over it in great depth, because I go over it like 5 different times on I do different sweeps through the actual text to look for different things as I compile what you see. And so I go through it like 5 different times, and it just kind of dawned on me. I was like, wait a minute, like the grain, because I always used to think, like, what are they making? Like, why are the grain? What are they making with so much grain? Like, how many things can you actually make in your variety? They must have had a very limited diet, or very limited, culinary choices, because you can only make so much with grain. But then I kind of shook myself awake and realized, wait a minute, the animals need the grain.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the animals need the grain. The animals are the ones that they used to create other forms of produce. They had the water wasn't the problem, right? But if you don't have a strong animal that can actually till that ground for you, or go and help you bring in the harvest, as you might need, it's very difficult to have an abundance of food, of different types of food. So the grain was super important. Just like in modern times, right? Grain prices are like 3 times as what they were 15 months ago for a lot of farmers in the US. And so it makes it much more difficult to produce the same amount that you used to, right? You're just like in Pharaoh's dream, the cows are thinner, mm-hmm. because they're not getting enough food. They're not getting enough grain. So
I ran across this statement in Exodus, I want to say 16, and I forget the context of it, whether it was contextually applicable to like all of life or just for a certain situation. But God was like, you shall eat bread in the morning and meat at night, or dinner. Was that like a standard of a traditional diet? Like you would have breakfast for You would have grain, bread for breakfast, and then you would have your meat, your sustenance of the animal for
Wasn't I
dinner.
thought that was around when they were getting the manna in the morning and then the quail in the
I
evening.
think it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that what that was? That's right.
Yeah, I don't know.
But the other thing too, Sean, when you're talking about the animals would plow, even if you didn't have animals that were plowing and stuff like that, if you just had a sheep, a flock of sheep, you would eat the sheep and then they produce milk and all the different things that you can do at the dairy. So
Right.
even if the animals just ate the grain and they weren't, because when I think about a famine, my mind initially went that, oh yeah, they fed the grain to the animals and then they got, all kinds of milk and they just survived on the meat and the milk and stuff. But I didn't think about the animals, tilling the ground and them still actually having produce and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So it's just the whole cycle is being disrupted when your workforce, your labor force of the animals can't help you, so it's very interesting. And since I wasn't an actual farmer, I'm sure there's people that have animals and farmers and ranchers in the audience are just laughing at me right now. Like, well, of course, dummy, but I wasn't raised on a farm, so I don't have any familiarity with a lot of that kind of stuff. So it's just interesting to see though that all the cultures back then were mostly agricultural societies, and even still today, a lot of people don't realize how much we depend on farmers, and I think that's the sad thing, because I wish that everybody had a small version of a garden in their backyard, in addition to the local farmers with their large plots of land and their large produce gatherings. I wish everyone could have the familiarity to grow and go out and till the land on their own, get their hands and feet in the soil. I think there's something extremely therapeutic about that, the way we were designed to go out and do that. And I'm not trying to get into like new age stuff about, what happens to you when you touch the soil, but there is something very therapeutic about going out and working the land, for sure. So in this particular chapter, we had, wait 1 second here. So this at this point is almost they're still debating at the end of this about whether or not they're going to go back and take Benjamin with them, because that was the request from Joseph, right? Next time you come back, if you want Simeon, you got to bring Joseph down so I can see him. And it's interesting that these brothers throughout this whole little scenario, they're not really catching on, right? Because they just don't recognize Joseph. I mean, the guy's speaking Egyptian, right? Because it says later he actually starts speaking Hebrew with them so they can understand him. And there's an interpreter with him the whole time.
And
so
it had been 20 years,
Yes,
so
that's right. Yeah. I don't look the same when I was 17. So, and especially if we're talking ancient Egypt, and especially if he's got on like makeup and, a whole bunch of like some sort of headdress or whatever, all the different things that their leaders would wear, all the jewelry and everything. So yeah, it's very possible that he had no clue. They had no clue because they could physically recognize him, and his voice may not sound the same either. Yeah, so I just think it's interesting to me that during this process, the brothers don't seem to catch on. Like, why does this guy want to see our little brother? It's kind of a weird request,
It is.
Yeah. How does that validate that they're not spies?
Right. Exactly. And so as a result of this, Simeon's being held in jail. And so then they go back to the father, and the father's like, no, I'm not sending Benjamin with you. But then there's no resolution. And we're going to read about that in the next chapter, how Judah goes up to him and was like, dude, we could have been there and back twice by now. Like, what are you doing, Jacob? We gotta make a decision here. Simeon's not with us. Let us just take Benjamin with us. So at this point, Jacob is still delaying, and that's interesting because he doesn't want to let Benjamin go. He's afraid to lose him as well. But here in Genesis 42, for the summary, it says the famine reached the land of Canaan. Jacob sent 10 of Joseph's brothers to Egypt to purchase grain. Joseph recognized his brothers when they arrived in Egypt. Joseph recognized his brothers when they arrived in Egypt to buy grain and treated them harshly, accusing them of being spies. Joseph manipulates the situation in order for his brothers to come again to Egypt and bring Benjamin with them the next time. And Joseph holds Simeon in jail for the year time period between the brothers taking grain back to Jacob and their next trip back to Egypt with Benjamin. Jacob doesn't want Benjamin to go, but Reuben vows for Benjamin's security. And I think that this, to me, this kind of tugged at my heart when I lined up the rest of Jubilees in the Testament of Reuben, about how much Reuben was trying to save Joseph originally, and he couldn't. And so then here is another potential moment where he might lose another younger brother, and he's and they're already like their conversation in Egypt, they're already blaming this whole bad scenario because of what they did to Joseph. Like that's their internal conversation is like, oh man, what is happening to us? And they just keep going, it's because we did this to Joseph. Like they're just like oh, we can't hear you, West Bliss.
My bad. Like every time something bad happened, they would immediately be like, this is our, repayment for what we did to them. It's we reap what we sow.
Do you think that was more because of just a conscience issue, or do you think that was because they had parts of the law that said curses for sin and blessings for righteousness?
A little of both. Yeah, a little of both, personally. Yeah, it's hilarious to me. So that's why my heart goes out to Reuben, especially when you read about how repentant Reuben was for what he had already done to Jacob with Bilhah, and how he struggled with that for such a long time that he wouldn't even look Jacob in the eyes for 7 years. And so therefore, here's another moment where he's like, he doesn't want to bring his father any more pain, and he feels like he has because he couldn't save Joseph. And he sees how Jacob mourned for Joseph for like an entire year. And then here's this additional opportunity come up in his life where he may fail again, or he's fearing that he may fail again with Benjamin's, so he's like personally vowing his own 2 sons and himself for the security of Benjamin, which I think is pretty severe.
Like a collateral, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's like, if I don't bring Benjamin back, you can kill my 2 sons. Like, that's crazy.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
Jacob's like, oh, I'm going to lose all my kids.
Yeah. Yeah, that's wild. So anything else in this chapter, guys?
What was this, chapter 42? Yeah, they did Joseph dirty, and he's now in the position to give him a hard time. So he's like, y'all are some spies, right? Prove yourself. But really, he's got this plan to bring the family back together.
Yeah, it's interesting because you would think that because of Joseph's heart, he's even struggling to go through with putting on this act of being harsh to them. That's how much he's already forgiven them in this time period, and that's what we're going to see unfold a little bit more in the next chapter, but a lot more next week. But without any further thoughts or notes, I'm going to jump into 43. You guys ready?
Yes, sir.
Sounds good.
All right. So here in 43, it says, now the famine was still severe in the land. So when Jacob's sons had eaten all the grain they brought from Egypt, their father said to them, go back and buy us a little more food. But Judah replied, the man solemnly warned us, you will not see my face again unless your brother is with you. And if you will send our brother with us, we will go down and buy food for you. But if you will not send him, we will not go. For the man told us, you will not see my face again unless your brother is with you. Why did you bring this trouble upon me? Israel asked. Why did you tell the man you had another brother? And they replied, the man questioned us in detail about ourselves and our families. Is your father still alive? Do you have another brother? And we answered him accordingly. How could we possibly know that he would say, bring your brother here? And Judah said to his father Israel, send the boy with me. We will go at once so that we may live and not die, neither we nor you nor our children. I will guarantee his safety. You may hold me personally responsible if I do not bring him back and set him before you. Then may I bear the guilt before you all my life. If we had not delayed, we could have come and gone twice by now. Then their father Israel said to them, it must be so, then do this. Put some of the best products of the land in your packs, carry them down as a gift for the man, a little balm and a little honey, spices and myrrh, pistachios and almonds. Take double the silver with you so that you may return the silver that was put back into the mouths of your sacks. Perhaps it was a mistake. Take your brother as well and return to the man at once. May God Almighty grant you mercy before the man, that he may release your other brother along with Benjamin. As for me, if I am bereaved, I am bereaved. So the men took these gifts, along with double amount of the silver, and Benjamin as well. Then they hurried down to Egypt and stood before Joseph. When Joseph saw Benjamin with his brothers, he said to the steward of his house, take these men to my house, slaughter an animal and prepare it, for they shall dine with me at noon. The man did as Joseph had commanded and took the brothers to Joseph's house. But the brothers were frightened that they had been taken to Joseph's house. We have been brought here because of the silver that was returned in our bags the first time, they said. They intended to overpower us and take us as slaves along with our donkeys. So they approached Joseph's steward and spoke to him at the entrance to the house. Please, sir, they said, we really did come down here to buy for the first time to buy food. But when we came to the place we lodged for the night, we opened our sacks, and behold, each of us found his silver in the mouth of his sack. It was the full amount of our silver, and we had brought it back with us. We have brought additional silver with us to buy food. We do not know who put our silver in our sacks. It is fine, said the stewardess. Do not be afraid. Your God, the God of your father, gave you the treasure that was in your sacks. I received your silver. Then he brought Simeon out to them. And the steward took the men into Joseph's house, gave them water to wash their feet, and provided food for the donkeys. Since the brothers had been told that they were going to eat a meal there, they prepared their gift for Joseph's arrival at noon. When Joseph came home, they presented him with the gifts they had brought, and they bowed to the ground before him. He asked if they were well, and then he asked, How is your elderly father you told me about? Is he still alive? Your servant, our father, is well, they answered. He is still alive. And they bowed down to honor him. When Joseph looked up and saw his brother Benjamin, his own mother's son, he asked, Is this your youngest brother, the one you told me about? Then he declared, May God be gracious to you, my son. Joseph hurried out because he was moved to tears for his brother, and he went to a private room to weep. Then he washed his face and came back out, regained his composure. He said, Serve the meal. They separately served Joseph, his brothers, and the Egyptians. They ate separately because the Egyptians would not eat with the Hebrews, since that was detestable to them. They were seated before Joseph in order by age, from the firstborn to the youngest, and the men looked at one another in astonishment. When the portions were served to them from Joseph's table, Benjamin's portion was 5 times larger than any of the others. So they feasted and drank freely with Joseph. All right.
Come and buy milk and wine and bread without money.
That's just such a beautiful parallel, right? Righteous stewardship, righteous governance. And he's like, hey, yes, it's for sale, but if you need it, come and take it for free.
What's that? Isaiah 55?
55, yeah.
Somewhere in there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's what do you guys think about this chapter? So much good stuff in here.
I love that they go to Joseph, right? And Jacob tells them to bring gifts, right? They bring some bar nuts, it looks like, right? Pistachios, almonds, a little balm, but wait, there's myrrh, right? It also says an aromatic gum. And I was like, what is this? Some juicy fruit or some bubblicious? But I pondered the symbology, right, that parallels with Yeshua, and I thought to look up frankincense, and frankincense is actually an aromatic resin used in incense and perfumes, a hardened gum-like material that comes from the trunk of boswellia tree. So the aromatic gum could have been frankincense.
Interesting. Nice. So what were the 3 gifts that that Jesus was received? Gold, frankincense, and myrrh?
And they bring money, an aromatic gum, and myrrh.
And in the book of Jubilees, it actually says instead of silver, it says they had gold with them in their sacks.
Doesn't it later on actually say something about we brought back your silver and gold? I thought that was in one of the chapters here.
Maybe it may be. I just keep seeing silver mentioned. I don't remember mentioning gold in Genesis, but it does in Jubilees. Yeah.
Okay.
It's interesting.
Maybe. Yeah. I can't imagine. One of the things I love is when they says that they were ordered from oldest to youngest. Like their brains had to be going, what the heck is going on here?
How does he know, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's pretty interesting. Especially that means they're smart enough to notice something like that. You know, like they have a sense of self-awareness of like, wait a minute, this can't be a coincidence. Like we're all ordered properly from our date of birth. Like this is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what did you guys think about them being served separately from the Egyptians? Actually, before we get into that, we're going to go into that in just a minute.
Okay.
Yeah, because I think that's going to be a part of a special segment. We're going to talk about some things, but let's just look at some of the other things in here that may have stood out to us. My thought was their paranoia. That's what kind of stuck out to me. So when they get to his house, they're like, "Oh, they're just going to rob us and take our donkeys." And you're like, "Bro, this dude has his own donkeys. He doesn't need your donkeys. Like this is you're sitting here with the vice president of all of Egypt, the most powerful nation in the world." And even before the famine, they were one of the most powerful nations. Now they definitely are the most powerful nation because of what's going on with Joseph's plan for this famine. All the nations are coming to them and giving them their wealth for this grain. So like, they don't need your donkeys, bro. Like you're okay.
Mm-hmm.
And there was definitely an awareness of a prejudice between the Egyptians and the Hebrews, like you said, we'll talk about here shortly.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the things, kind of going back to the beginning of the chapter, that I wonder, you know, when Jacob is like, we need food, they're like, you know what we got to do if we want us to get food. So you tell us when, and we're happy to go. But we ain't going down there unless you got Benjamin with us. I just wonder how many times like he's like, go get some food. Negative. Not until we have Benjamin. All right. Well, you ain't doing that. Well, we need food. Yeah, we know. can we take Benjamin? Nah, never mind. Right? Like, I'm sure that conversation happened a handful of times.
Yeah, it was clearly they delayed an entire year. Like they said, they could have went and came back twice, and so I was. I mean, clearly Jacob is really struggling with this. The other guys, I mean, it was just like, all right, and nobody cares that Simeon's in prison. So I don't know what his personality was like, but they're like, we get some more food next month. Are we really out yet? Look at the reserves. Are we really out yet? Like, we can wait. We can wait. And they're like, we're running out of food, or even our grandchildren are going to die. We need to go back down there. And no one's mentioning we need to go get Simeon out. So he must be quite the character. But did you guys notice that in this verse here, in verse 23, the steward of Joseph's house, in response to them being afraid and trying to like over explain themselves about the silver that they found in their sacks, they're like, look, we brought that silver plus more silver back. Like, it must have been a mistake. You guys gave us the silver back. And the steward's like, do not be afraid. Your God, the God of your father, gave you the treasure that was in your sacks. I received your silver. So like he's saying, no, I saw your money the first time. It was put back in there intentionally. And your God gave you that. So like, is Joseph teaching his servants about Yahweh? Is this guy showing a sense of respect to knowing that these brothers also serve the same God that Joseph serves? It's very interesting language coming from an Egyptian servant in the household of Joseph.
It is, yeah. Why would he say that like that? He could have just said, yeah, Joseph told us to give it back to you.
It also seems possible. I'm just thinking, if Joseph has this amazing ability to interpret the dreams and it comes true the way that he does, I'd be willing to bet a handful of the people that were closest to him are going, we might abandon our gods that I've never seen do anything like this and pay attention to what Joseph's talking about over here. So I'd be willing to bet he had a handful of people, if not more than a handful, that were actual followers of Yahweh because of just the circumstances and the events that they watched themselves.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking a gift of the Spirit. A lot of people don't realize what we're reading here with Joseph being able to interpret these dreams, but that gift of wisdom is a gift of the Spirit, guys.
Mm-hmm.
It's talked about in 1 Corinthians. So people ask, well, the gifts of the Spirit, only happened after Yeshua in Acts 2. Nope. Here's one right here in the life of Joseph. It literally propelled him to a position of place, power, and prominence, and allowed him to save, all the known world at the time. As he tells later in other chapters, he was sent ahead of them for such a time as this to help, save these people. And that only happened because the Father had a gift of the Spirit flowing through Joseph to interpret these dreams. And yes, that is an evangelistic tool that brings people to the goodness of God.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, to me, if he's trying to tell Potiphar's wife, who's trying to get in his pants, if he's trying to tell her about the goodness of God and about the laws of the Most High and everything, knowing that she's threatening to kill him, he's definitely telling the servants under his charge about the goodness of God and the laws of God.
And exemplifying it.
Yeah. You probably could not get away from Joseph. Joseph, what do you want to talk about? Well, I could talk about the goodness of God right now. Yeah. Okay. Well, I was wondering if you want to talk about something else. I mean, that's all I want to talk about.
They're like, but I wanted to talk about Bast and how he went to the underworld and fought the 12 demons. And he's like, no. We're going to talk about the goodness of God. Let me explain to you this idea about, actually, we're going to see that next week's portion as he continues to fulfill this plan of the grain collection and dispersion as the famine gets more severe in the latter years of that 7 years of famine. He uses the law of God, unlike any other opportunity we've seen in the Bible, in order for this plan to actually work. So we'll talk about that more next week. But yeah, he listened. All right. So from age 0 to 17, he's with Jacob in the household of Jacob in the land of Canaan. And so whatever he was taught at that time, he definitely listened because he's using these principles in his adult life, being away from that influence in the heart of one of the most occultic nations of all of history. Mm-hmm. So train up a child the way he should go, man. That verse is really coming into full effect here.
Absolutely. It is interesting, though. I've commented many times, I've got a younger brother and a younger sister, how different we all are growing up with the same parents. And we see the same thing, too. You got these 12 brothers that are quite different, all coming from, I guess, actually, they weren't the same parents, but still the same relatively similar household, the same father, right? The same person that would have been teaching righteousness and the law and everything. And yet they all turned out so different. I always find that fascinating.
Yeah, because look at the character here with Joseph, and then what we've already been talking about with Gad and Simeon. They really struggled. Later on in their life, they repented and developed good and righteous character, but in their younger years, boy, these guys were a nuisance. They did not have the same propensity to do the ways of Yahweh like Joseph did. So it's very interesting. Or like Levi, right? Levi was another great example of a completely opposite personality within these group of brothers that did what was right. So
I can relate. I was a nuisance when I was younger too.
Oh, yeah, me too.
Yes.
I caused some problems, that's for sure. Not proud of that one.
So here in Genesis 43, we read the idea that they were still needing grain. Judah and Jacob bickered about the return to Egypt and whether or not they will take Benjamin with them. Judah also guaranteed Benjamin's safety to his father Jacob. Judah reminded Jacob that his delaying had cost them 2 round trips. The brothers set off to Egypt again with gifts, twice as much silver, and Benjamin. And when the brothers arrived in Egypt, they were taken to Joseph's personal house. Which that's kind of a unique thing, right? That they weren't, and this is why they kept saying, Judah kept telling Jacob and reminding him, look, the man said we will not see him again unless we bring Benjamin with us. Earlier in chapter 41, I believe, it says that Joseph was set in charge to sell to the people. So when all the different people from the different nations would come through, they were funneled into a final place of standing before Joseph to buy their grain for their people's lands or governments. So he was personally overseeing the dispersion of this for the most part. As far as the royal treasuries, we're going to read in the next chapter, I believe it is, that the people themselves of Egypt saw what Joseph was doing and mimicked his behavior and started to develop their own household treasuries. But as far as the Egyptian royal treasuries, he was personally overseeing all the transactions of people buying that grain. So that's why Judah kept saying, look, we can't go buy grain because we have to go to Joseph. We can't go to some other person in Egypt to buy grain. And so, yeah, that's why they were surprised when not only did they get to go see Joseph, but his personal house, which was kind of rare. So they tried to explain about finding the silver in their satchels to the house steward, but the steward told them not to fear. Simeon was released to the brothers after this long period of time. And when Joseph arrived, the brothers presented their gifts and bowed down to him. Guys, this is the fulfillment of Joseph's dream when he was 17.
Yep.
From 20 years earlier, right? And then it says that Joseph prepared a meal for them and set them at the table by order of their birth. Benjamin was given a greater portion of food than the rest. Heard a lot of different interpretations on why Benjamin was given the greater portion of food. I honestly don't know. What do you guys think?
It's not because he was a ravenous wolf, as people like to misquote or out of context quote.
I think it was just another sign for them to be like, what the heck? Why would Benjamin? Because Benjamin's, again, unique. Benjamin is actual Joseph's full brother. And so just in my mind, it's just one more thing of like, what the heck's going on here? How come he gets that much more than us?
You mean like he was trying to like give him a subtle hint? Yeah,
because I'd be willing to bet. I mean, I don't know how old Benjamin was when Joseph was sold, but he probably was not old enough to partake in the event of, his selling into slavery. And so there probably was a different level of affection, maybe just because he was his brother or because maybe he didn't really know him that well. I don't know, but there's like a certain level of affection, it seems like.
Yeah, Benjamin definitely seemed to be fond of him, especially in his testament, right? Testament of Benjamin 3 says, "Do you also, therefore, my children, love the Lord of God and heaven of heaven and earth, and keep his commandments, following the example of the good and holy man Joseph." He goes on to say, "For if anyone does violence to a holy man, he repents, for the holy man is merciful to his reviler and hides his peace. And if anyone betrays a righteous man, the righteous man prays, though for a little bit he's humbled, yet not long after that he appears more glorious, as was Joseph, my brother." So yeah, he was fond of him. Had some kind words to say about him.
Pretty awesome. Well, speaking of not having kind words about the Hebrews, we're going to look at this strange reaction of the Hebrews versus the Egyptians when they're eating together. So this actually leads us into our theological rabbit trail. All right, guys. So this week we're asking this question of why did the Egyptians view eating with the Hebrews as detestable? That's what we just read in this last chapter.
they seem to have a strange aversion to sheep herding peoples for some odd reason.
They did. We see that discussion later with Pharaoh, Jacob, and Joseph. Joseph's trying to explain to his father Jacob, hey, the Hebrews, they don't like shepherds. So just tell them that, tell Pharaoh, introduce yourself the way I tell you to introduce yourself. We're going to read about that in a little bit.
You said it backwards. The Egyptians don't like shepherds.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yeah. The Egyptians didn't like the shepherds. So this is the part right here in Genesis 43:32. They ate separately because the Egyptians would not eat it with the Hebrews, since that was detestable. Okay. So they had this strange prejudice towards the Hebrews. Now, what I found that was interesting is that this is the same type of prejudice that we see in the other nations that are not serving Yahweh, and in the hearts of people that are going against the laws of Yahweh, or the behavior that Yahweh tells his disciples to do.
Such as the Pharisees in first century Judea.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's where, so we got in Genesis 46, which you're going to read about next week. He tells us a little bit about this, like what I just mentioned, right? Joseph is trying to explain the introduction of his brothers and his father after they came down to the land of Goshen to Pharaoh. And here at the bottom in verse 34, he says, you are to say your servants have raised livestock ever since our youth, both we and our fathers. Then you'll be allowed to settle the land of Goshen, since all the shepherds are detestable to the Egyptians. So there's this strange inherent bias that had been developing. We're going to see it intensify after the brothers moved down for a couple hundred years. That intensifies and eventually leads to the oppression of the Hebrews by the Egyptians once the king of Canaan takes over Egypt. And this, what leads us to Exodus chapter 8, is this moment when this king of Canaan has taken over Egypt as the Pharaoh. And so this is the king of Canaan, who also was from Assyria, because he was ruling over Babylon. So a lot of people don't realize that Babylon was ruling Egypt when the Israelites went into severe oppression, were restricted from worshiping Yahweh in the land of Goshen. And the people of Egypt were taught and fomented to hate the Hebrews even more than this inherent bias that they already had originally, just because of their occupation. So this intensified. The more that unrighteousness ruled in the land, the more prejudice and hatred intensified for the people of Yahweh. And
what have you heard about why the shepherd occupation? What is it they?
Well, yeah, I personally, like, if I just think about it, I honestly don't find it that hard to believe. And I think we kind of do the same thing. If you think about the Egyptians, like a lot of the stuff, we know they wore makeup and they were very kind of progressive as far as like their standards. They had high medicine and they were really clean. A shepherd's going to stink and they're going to be dirty and they're going to be probably not the most handsome thing to look at. And I see all the time, like, you don't see, if a homeless person wanted to come in and have a meal, clean, put together people would be like, whoa, what are you doing, pal? And they'd kind of separate. And so I don't know if it's as much just a bias towards the shepherds as it was like, that's a dirty, unclean person. Like, get away from them. They stink. I don't want to be around that nonsense. And so I think it's really not that different today.
The Hebrews didn't have the same maybe materialistic, like upkeep of, I don't know. Is that what you're getting at? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think of a shepherd, their clothes are going to be worn out. They're going to be sleeping with the sheep. They probably don't smell that good. They're, I'm sure they still have hygiene standards and stuff, but if you're around sheep all the time, you're not going to be as presentable and clean as, somebody who's counting money all day long, for example.
Sure. You may just have an inherent smell on you. There's a sheep farm that we used to drive by when we used to live in northern Colorado. That boy, you could smell it literally from like 15 miles away, and then when you drove by it, it was just the smell, the stench was strong, and so the neighboring town, whenever there was an east wind, the neighboring town would smell like the sheep farm, and so even though the sheep farm was way out 10 miles out to the east of it, so it's just funny how they do have a strong smell for sure. But we do know that the Hebrews had a sense of understanding what it means to cleanse themselves and be ready to go to the temple to offer sacrifice, whomever was ministering at Bethel at that time. And so, but yeah, I agree with you as far as just a general premise. There could be definitely an inherent cultural bias just because of occupation, just if they smelled a lot. We see this, I think, kind of reflected in James chapter 2. Where James is trying to encourage people not to show favoritism if someone comes into you that's of low low economic value, and then another wealthy person comes in, don't show the wealthy person favoritism. And I think it's interesting, though, that as this hatred intensified, it intensified because of the Babylonian ruler that came in over Egypt and took over Pharaoh. This is detailed in, I think, Jubilees chapter 48 or 47, as there was a war between Egypt and the king from Assyria, who was actually from the land of Canaan. So I think this is interesting that once that transition of power happened, here, as we see in Exodus chapter 8, this conversation between Pharaoh, Moses, and Aaron, says Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, go sacrifice to your God within this land. So this is after multiple interactions between Moses and Aaron presenting themselves to Pharaoh and saying, this is what we'd like to do. And with each interaction, Pharaoh changes the parameters. He changes the rules. And in this one is no different, this particular moment where he tells Moses, go and sacrifice to your God within this land. Moses replied, it would not be right to do that, because the sacrifices we offer to the Lord our God will be detestable to the Egyptians. If we offer sacrifices that are detestable for the Egyptians, will they not stone us? So he kept saying, we need to leave this land 3 days journey into the wilderness to go do our sacrifices with all of our people and with all of our animals. And Pharaoh just keeps saying, like, back and forth, no, just take your people, don't take your animals. Okay, no, leave your kids here. Just take the adults. And he's like, no, okay. So now here's another moment where he's trying to change the rules. And he's like, all right, well, all of you guys can sacrifice in the land with all your animals, do whatever you want, just do it in the land. You can't leave. All right. So that wasn't what Moses and Aaron are asking for. There's still this idea of the Egyptians viewing the Hebrews as detestable. And I think this is fascinating because we see this type of thing all throughout the scripture, right? Is that the people that were doing the ways of the nations and not respecting Yahweh inherently had this strange feeling of prejudice towards people that wanted to do the ways of Yahweh, as well as the poor and the people in society that didn't have that were of less regard, if I should put it like this. They were low esteem, they had issues financially in their life, and they were considered poor. We see Jesus having addressed this same type of attitude within the Pharisees, and there's a lot of people that would like to present the case that the Pharisees came over from Babylon in the 2nd and 3rd century BC. And this is where this Talmudic teaching started really codifying into what was a pure form of Judaism that then gets corrupted into this Talmudic oral tradition of Judaism, bringing over all these traditions from Babylonian influence. And here we have Jesus addressing this same type of attitude of the Pharisees, holding themselves in a sense of elitism over other people in the society that they viewed it for whatever reason, their occupation to be of less regard. So here in Matthew 9:13 says, Jesus went on from there. He saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax booth. He said, follow me. He told him. Matthew got up and followed him. So later, as Jesus was dining at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? On hearing this, Jesus said, is it not the wealthy who need a doctor? It's not the wealthy who need a doctor, but the sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. So the reason I say that is this idea of viewing another person in your society as detestable is a huge heart issue. Because Joseph is treating all the Egyptians in his realm with respect, and he doesn't view them as detestable. But yet when these other foreigners come in, the Egyptians kind of show their backside, right? They show that they got this strange attitude of viewing these other people, and specifically shepherds, as detestable. So this is, to me, I'm seeing like the same heart as the Pharisees from within this cultural institution of prejudice that's being propagated throughout Egypt, even all the way back during the days with Joseph. So we go on to see this further in Matthew 9:11-14. I'm sorry, guys. This is a quick typo. Let me change something real quick.
You're good.
This is supposed to be Acts chapter 10.
Oh, I was about to say, cool. Yeah. So whereas the law of God said to, love one another, even the strangers within your gates. And so
that's right.
That kind of behavior of acting like people are detestable is against the behavior of God.
Yeah. And this is actually something that even Peter took him a long time to learn. So this is after he discipled with Yeshua on the ground every day in his face. and Yeshua has ascended to heaven, Peter finds himself a few years later still struggling with this prejudicial mentality. And he has to have this entire dream presented to him, and later angelic visit or an angelic appointment organized by angels with this guy named Cornelius, this Italian commander. And all of it was to teach Peter what he's going to learn here in this passage in Acts 10. It says, now Cephas came to Antioch. However, I opposed him to his face. Oh, I'm sorry, guys. I'm messing this up. This is Galatians chapter 2. 1 second.
Oh,
1 second. I messed up. Yeah, this is Paul having to address Peter about this attitude as well.
Was that after or before God already did with the vision?
I'm guessing this was before, personally.
Okay.
But yeah, it's hard to line up. I try to line it up. It's really hard because Paul doesn't give an actual indicator of this exactly. But here, Paul has to actually address this attitude he sees within Peter. And this is in Galatians chapter 2. He says, the next day about the 6th hour. Hang on, guys. I'm struggling. I got something messed up.
That's all right. You put a lot of work into this.
Okay, that was the...
That's X. And this vision was not about what animals are food and what animals are not food.
I've had a couple of conversations.
I switched my
about
Acts 10 and my Galatians 2. I apologize, guys.
You're good.
Here we go. That's why I had 2 slides and they had different titles. That's why. Okay, so let's do this right, so that people watching can understand what I'm trying to say properly. So here in Galatians 2, it says, when Cephas came to Antioch, however, I opposed him to his face because he stood to be condemned. Or before certain men came from James, he used to eat with the Gentiles. But when they arrived, he began to draw back and separate himself for fear of those in the circumcision group. The other Jews joined him in his hypocrisy, so that by their hypocrisy, even Barnabas was led astray. And when I saw that they were not walking in line with the truth of the gospel, I said to Cephas in front of them all, if you who are a Jew live like a Gentile and not like a Jew, how can you compel the Gentiles to live like Jews? Now, unfortunately, the dispensational crowd will see, we're not supposed to do the law of God. Excuse you. Well, guys, the Jews had their own codes and customs, many of which based on old tradition. And that's why we read from Matthew 9 just a few moments ago of Yeshua addressing their particular traditions that caused them to override the law of God, caused them to ignore the law of God, which was like Westblaze mentioned, to treat the foreigner with love and respect, and also to treat everybody in your society with love and respect. And so this was a moment where Peter, being swayed by this intimidating group of this quote unquote circumcision group, which was a group of Pharisees of that sect, that even Peter and Barnabas were going back to this tradition in their time, which was to not eat with people from other nations.
Meanwhile, they're going around saying love, preaching the gospel of Yeshua, which is, part of it. Part of it is to love one another. He said the greatest commandments: love the Lord your God and love one another, right? And then they're like, except those guys, don't love them.
Yeah. Can you imagine, like, and this is, oh man, I remember when I was in a youth group when I was younger, and the youth pastor was trying to talk to us about cliques, and he was like, look, he's like, I can't stop you if you're at high school, if you're at another building, but he says, when you're in this church and you're in this youth group, you're not going to be in cliques. I want all of you to interact. I want all of you to do the games and the activities and everything. I don't want you guys just pairing off into little groups and having cliques, because I didn't understand that back then, because I was like, oh, this is just what kids do. Like, that because at churches, there were multiple different school districts that the kids from those different school districts, different parts of town might go to one centralized church. So you didn't really know all these kids that went all to the youth group, but that's what this youth pastor was trying to help us learn, right? To overcome this inherent seclusionary bias of, I don't know that person, therefore I'm going to treat them differently. You know what I mean? But instead be openly and loving towards everyone that you're around. And this is that same type of internal fearful bias that Cephas and Peter and Barnabas are slipping into out of fear of those in the circumcision group. So this is an intimidation factor about this, that they're not standing up for what's right either. And Paul is like, look, man, I had to address them about this because they were, trying to fall back into these traditions that were being taught by the Pharisees, even though our master Yeshua had told us to go to the nations and tell them the good news. Right. Which means inherently that if they accept the good news, they're grafted in and they're part of us now.
Yeah.
And then we have the Torah, right? Which the Torah tells you, Exodus 12, Numbers 35, and other places, even if they're not grafted in yet, treat them with love. The foreigner within your gates, right? There's one law for everybody. Well, what's that law? That law equals your loving behavior towards them. So it's like the whole concept was there should be no prejudicial seclusionary mentality. You need to treat everybody the same with love and respect. Treat them as if they're already family. And so I thought it's fascinating here because this is what Peter has to learn in this extravagant way with this vision about these animals in Acts chapter 9 through 14. And then he learns that lesson, and then he explains what he learned when he meets Cornelius, whom he's told by the Spirit of God that he's supposed to go meet Cornelius with this kind of like this divine appointment kind of thing. And Cornelius, an angel of God, shows up to him and tells him to go meet Peter. So like, but Cornelius is an Italian, right? So he's quote unquote of the nations, but he's a devout person that devoutly fears God, which I think is fascinating. He's already trying to learn, and he's already respecting God, and he fears God. But from my understanding, he just didn't know about Jesus yet. So Peter's about to explain the rest of it to him, right?
Real quick, I wondered, when it says that he feared God, did that mean that he had the Torah and he feared God that way, or he knew that just based on like looking at creation that, man, there has to be something that made this? Do we get any insight into that?
I personally believe he did have access to some of the scrolls, and it already had a conversion moment, if you will, because remember, Yeshua talked about in Matthew 23 that the Pharisees, they also traveled on land and sea to go make proselytes.
Okay.
So, but if that's not how he heard about it, you also have the history of the Maccabees from only 150 years earlier, which they then had an incredibly vibrant, faithful society in Samaria and in the Jerusalem area of Israelites doing covenant properly, stuff that, without having the Maccabees in your Bible, you would never have known, right? How did John the Baptist's parents be considered so devout? Who taught them?
Yeah.
Right. Where did they learn this behavior? How did, this kind of concept of when you run into what about this prophetess in Luke chapter 2, Anna from the tribe of Asher? Where did she come from? Who taught her to respect and love Yahweh? Right. So like you already had how do I put this? Like a heartbeat, a swelling of people that were wanting to know God and live right according to his law and his ways, that had seeped out, if I could put it like that, into the Mediterranean area in sprinkled out pieces. And of course, many of the dispersed Israelites were living amongst the Greeks, right? As the disciples theorize in John chapter 14, when Jesus is like, I'm where I'm going, where I'm going. And they're like, wait, where is he going? Is he going to the Greeks? So like, or is he going to those dispersed amongst the Greeks? So like there already was people that understood the ways of Yahweh, the covenant of Yahweh, but they just weren't living in the centralized area of Jerusalem. But in this moment here, Peter is being taught, hey, what you've been taught your whole life from these Pharisees in this region is not Torah. You do not need to regard people from other nations as unclean. You do not need to regard them as like, if God has made them clean, especially if they're a part of the faith, right? If he's grafted them in, they're clean.
Yeah. He explains it again in verse 34 through 35 of the same chapter, right? Opening his mouth, Peter said, I most certainly understand now that God is not one to show partiality, but in every nation, the man who fears him and does what is right is welcome to him.
That's right. That's right. So I'll just read through this real quick for the sake of the audience. We've been kind of commenting on it, but not actually reading it. So Acts chapter 10, this is where it says the next day about the 6th hour. This is verse 9. As the men were approaching the city on their journey, Peter went up on the roof to pray. He became hungry and wanted something to eat, but while the meal was being prepared, he fell into a trance. What I think is interesting about this, guys, just a quick side note, this word trance, it's also used in the book of Jubilees in chapter 14 about Abraham, and which is the altar sacrifice moment of Genesis 15. And it just means you're having a prophetic vision. But we don't use this word anymore, right? This word trance has an extremely horrible connotation to us now, right? Like you're being hypnotized or like you're doing some occultic practice of some sort. But the ancient use of this word trance was like a prophetic vision. So it's interesting that Acts uses it. So it says that he saw heaven open and something like a large sheet being let down to earth by its four corners. It contained all kinds of four-footed animals and reptiles of the earth, as well as the birds of the air. Then a voice said to him, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." "No, Lord," Peter answered, "I've never eaten anything impure or unclean." So The voice spoke to him a second time and said, "Do not call anything impure that God has made clean." This happened 3 times, and all at once the sheet was taken back into heaven. So, unfortunately, a lot of people in the dispensation crowd will say, "Well, see, look, God was saying that all foods are clean right here." No, that's not what the vision was about. He explains what the vision was about. It was about men being made clean by God through their conversion. So he's going to actually explain that as we keep going. Verse 17, while Peter was puzzling over the meaning of the vision, the men sent by Cornelius found Simon's house and approached the gate. They called out to ask if Simon called Peter was staying there. And as Peter continued to reflect on the vision, the Spirit said to him, "Behold, 3 men are looking for you. So get up, go downstairs and accompany them without hesitation, because I've sent them." So Peter went down to the men and said, "Here I am, the one you're looking for. Why have you come?" "Cornelius the centurion has sent us," they said. "He's a righteous and God-fearing man with a good reputation among the whole Jewish nation. A holy angel instructed him to request your presence in his home so he could hear a message from you." So guys, this guy is so devout, angels are appearing to him. Like, this is just like before Jesus showed up. Devout men got angelic visitations. Yeah. Right? So again, this is just another incredible refutation to this ridiculous dispensation doctrine that everything changed as soon as Jesus showed up. Is that suddenly that God, all the ways that Yahweh works suddenly changed when Jesus? No. People that are devout and fear God, God has a consistent behavior with them because it's the consistent behavior he instructs of them in discipleship. Jesus did that behavior. Jesus taught that behavior. Jesus is still doing that behavior. Jesus is going to come back and have the entire world do that behavior. There is consistency with the Father and his Son.
That's right. Yeah, there's still unclean birds in Revelation, right? Paul quotes Leviticus in 2 Corinthians 6 when he says, "Do not touch what is unclean." Uncleanness is listed as one of the in Galatians 5. What is it? The gifts of the Spirit versus not the fruits of the Spirit, but the bad stuff. Uncleanness is listed as one of those.
Yes. Yeah. So it's a good point. That's a good point, brother. And then Peter invites the guest in the next day, he got ready and went with them and accompanied by some of the brothers from Joppa. The following day, he arrives in Caesarea, where Cornelius was expecting them, and called together his relatives and close friends. And as Peter was about to enter, Cornelius met him and fell at his feet to worship him. But Peter helped him up. "Stand up," he said. "I'm only a man myself." And as Peter talked with him, he went inside and found many people gathered together. I'm guessing these are people that Cornelius knows. So these may not be, regular groups of disciples that they have been making, and it may not even be Israelites. I'm not sure. Because Caesarea was near the base of Mount Hermon, near the northern border of Israel. So yes, it technically is in the land of Israel, but that's also in northern Samaria. There was a lot of different tribes mixed in with these people groups. Verse 28, Peter says to them, "You know how unlawful it is for a Jew to associate with a foreigner or to visit him." Now, guys, if you don't know the law of God, you don't realize that he's not talking about the law of God. Mm-hmm. He's talking about the law of the Pharisees, the Talmudic oral standard the Pharisees pushed, the fear of the party of the circumcision group.
Traditions of men.
The traditions of men. This is not from the Torah. This is not from the law and the prophets. This is the word law, the nomo in the Greek just means the instruction, right? So the instruction from the Jews of his day that were the circumcision group that imposed this instruction onto the members of Israel, tried to tell people, well, you can't associate with foreigners or visit them. This is why they were giving Jesus a hard time for going to eat with Matthew and the other sinners and tax collectors. It's that same mentality. This was their mentality that they pushed. But Peter explains that God has shown me not to call any man impure or unclean. Then Peter began to speak. "I now truly understand that God does not show favoritism. Why would he? We're all descendants of Noah. We're all the same people. Like, why would he possibly? How could he? This is not a science fiction reality. There's not different races. This is not Star Wars. There's not, this isn't the cafe with like 15 different species of aliens in it. Like, we're all humanity. We're all descendants of Noah. Like, we're all the same people. God can't show favoritism.
Every man will be judged according to their works and deeds.
That's right. So this is where Peter just tries to, he's revealing to them, like, and even some of these people he's never met before, what a strange first time to meet Peter, where he's like, guys, I've realized now that the only reason I'm here is because I told that I can't show favoritism. So it's like such a strange way to introduce yourself. This, they've all heard about Peter, and like, it's such a big deal to the point where Cornelius is bowing at his feet the moment he walks into his house. And Peter's like, well, I'm glad that you guys feel this way, because I realized just recently that I should feel this way about you as well. So it's like,
got a slight confession to make here.
yeah, it's such a strange, awkward moment here. But he goes on to explain, verse 36, he has sent this message to the people of Israel, proclaiming the gospel of peace through Jesus Christ, who is Lord of all. You yourselves know what has happened throughout Judea, beginning in Galilee with the baptism that John proclaimed, how God anointed Jesus of Nazareth with the Holy Spirit with power. Now Jesus went around doing good and healing all who were oppressed by the devil, because God was with him. We are witnesses of all that he did, both in the land of the Jews and in Jerusalem. And although they put him to death by hanging him on a tree, God raised him up on the third day and caused him to be seen, not by all the people, but by the witnesses God had chosen beforehand, by us who ate and drank with him after he rose from the dead. He commanded us to preach to the people and to testify that he is the one appointed by God to judge the living and the dead. All the prophets testify about him, that everyone who believes in him receives forgiveness of sins through his name. Everyone, guys. And this, to me, brings me back to Joseph, in my mind, my understanding, because we have a precedent from last week. He was trying to tell the Egyptians that he was around about the law of God, to the point where now in this week, we see his servants comforting his own brothers with, the language of the covenant. Mm-hmm. It makes me wonder if all the prophets testify about whom they believe in, the forgiveness of sins through the name, through the authority of the priesthood of Jesus of Nazareth, why he was appointed and sent by God to judge the living and the dead. The living and the dead. This is the same story that Enoch, all the way down, like Adam down to Enoch, down to Noah, down to Shem, down to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and all the boys of Jacob, which includes Joseph. They all know this story, guys. And we're going to see that Simeon knows the story here in our companion passage here in a minute.
Yeah. The Testament of the 12 Patriarchs is just full and riddled with so much prophecy, more than a lot of, books of scripture, of what we would call the Old Testament, of messianic prophecy of him coming to be a high priest and a king. And the resurrections mentioned, the kingdom to come. Beautiful stuff.
Yeah, that he was come in the flesh. Like they knew this whole story. This is why Peter would say that all the prophets knew this too. And then they were witnesses of some of the fulfillment of this stuff. So this is why you would say that it's the nations that Yeshua was intended to draw in. So how could he possibly be prejudicial? The king who exemplifies the behavior of the covenant perfectly, his whole role was to come and have all the nations draw unto him. So here in Psalm 2, part of a prophecy about the Messiah, I've installed my king upon Zion, my holy mountain. I will proclaim the decree spoken to me by the Lord. You are my son. Today I have become your father. Ask me, I will make the nations your inheritance, the ends of the earth your possession. You'll break them with an iron scepter. You'll shatter them like pottery. So after he destroys the corrupt rulers of the nations, the people of those nations come to him because they're in need, just like the people in the famine came to Joseph who's in need. The people of the earth after the day of the Lord will come to Yeshua because they're in need, and he will teach them the ways of Yahweh. So Joseph is an incredible parallel example of the behavior and the fulfillment of the gospel of the kingdom through Yahweh, through the Son of God, sent by Yahweh to gather the nations for the sake of providing for them where their despotic leaders have taken from them, and then also teaching them right behavior so they can sustain themselves in covenant and get to eternal life later. So this is just super encouraging to me, because that's the behavior and the mentality that we see Joseph already exemplifying way back then. But he lived amongst people that did not share that, right? Because they were doing the ways of Babylon. They were doing the ways of the nations that rejected the covenant behavior of God, that creates division and separation as opposed to unity. So this is why, again, we don't have to read all this, but this is the kind of the crux of the example of this non-prejudicial behavior, that Yeshua, when he comes in verse 31, in his glory and all the angels are with him, he sits on his glorious throne and all the nations are gathered before him. He starts talking to them and separating them as sheep and goats. Well, the sheep, look at their behavior that they do that qualifies them as sheep to be spared in this moment. Verse 35, for I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you visited me.
Loving compassion.
Yep.
It's so amazing, guys. This is the heart of the Father. This is the Father and the Son's behavior is right here. This is what Jesus wants. This is what he does. This is what he wants to see from us as we treat, quote unquote, strangers, foreigners, people that are maybe not of our immediate family or not even of our immediate town, right? To be welcoming and hospitable. How interesting is it that Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed? Their sins piled up to heaven. Their cries went up to heaven. And what is the biggest thing that we see when the angels show up? That they're treating strangers who come into the city with the utmost disrespect, violence, murder, rape, and death. It's the opposite behavior of what Yeshua will do for the nations.
That's right. And it's cool too, because part of our inheritance, part of the promise of the resurrection is that we too inherit the nations, right? And we rule over them alongside Yeshua. And so what benefit would it be to us to be prejudicial towards, outsiders in that way?
That's right.
Sean says often, we get to practice now what we will be doing perfectly in the kingdom.
That's right, guys. Yeah, it's such a beautiful thing. It's like, it's only because it's beautiful for different reasons to different people, but to me, it's just so simple. It's not complicated. You don't have to have that little thing they do at Catholic churches where they like shake incense all over the aisles, that they walk up and down speaking Latin and dress up in this nonsense with your little Dagon fish hat. Like, guys, it's just simply loving people. It's just, you know what? You don't know who he is. All right, well, go find out. Like, let's just love some people. That's really, it's so simple. This is the heart of the Father and the Son. This is what he wants of us. This is what we'll do forever in eternity for the people that we encounter, especially for the first 1,000 years. It's just not that hard. But all right, without further rambling, guys, thank you for entertaining this theological rabbit trail. Straight to the face. hopefully, guys. It's funny that you start talking about the behavior. You start using the general premise terms of the law of God. People get super excited. You start defining it as, oh, you got to treat that person you don't know with love, favor, and compassion. And then they start getting kind of squirrely on you. And you're like, really? I thought we were all excited about the law of God here. Are we excited or not? Right? Oh, that means, we got to go love people that don't know as much about the Bible as we do.
We see it all the time in facets of, social media and in discussion, right? People are all about the feast days versus the, pagan holidays, the dietary laws. But then when it comes to actually interacting and engaging with love and in walking and patience and all that, it's hard for them, right?
Well, I can just speak for myself. When I came to understand Torah, I definitely became a bit of a Torah terrorist, as we've talked about in the past. And I don't think it was anything other than just being excited for this new understanding and wanting to work on myself, right? Because I can control the things that I do. Like, oh, I can do this. All right, cool. I'll follow the Sabbath. Oh, cool. I won't eat this food. And then, I don't know. I mean, it definitely takes some maturity to go, oh, wait a minute. The post that you shared on Facebook with the two people saying, well, he's not a real Christian because he doesn't follow the law. Well, he's not a real Christian because he thinks he can earn his salvation. That was such a perfect post to show, guys. It's
meanwhile the persecutors only care that they're a believer, right?
Exactly. So yeah.
Okay, just for the audience sake, I guess I'll
put it up. There you go.
I'm sorry,
so people can see what we're talking about. This is what he's talking about, guys. This is just a meme I made the other day, and just from time to time I have to prove to my wife that I can make memes. So because this is how we were attracted to each other in the very beginning, to our meme abilities. So this is basically just trying to say that there's an internal argument amongst believers, right? Because there's been this growing, extremely fervent group of people that have been coming out of mainstream churches, realizing that the fullness of God's instructions apply to them. And meanwhile, people in the mainstream churches think that they've gone back to the law, right? Because they have this really horrible understanding of what the law of God is. They think it's just Judaism. They don't realize that it is discipleship. And those people who realize it is discipleship, many of them start looking back at people still in the mainstream church who haven't come to this same understanding yet. And they start criticizing them for not being a believer because they haven't had the same realization yet. So unfortunately, the people that want to kill you in this earth, the people of Babylon, they don't care what you think. They just know that both of you think that Jesus is Lord, and they want to kill you because of that. So hopefully we just have to remember that we need to love each other, and, you know, your family of God, your fellow saints and brethren. First and foremost, we got to love them the most. But then secondly, like we've been talking about here, we just need to show the stranger and the foreigner the same love of God that we show to the family of God. So
100%. Did you see Lindsay's comment?
No, I guess not.
She never doubted.
Oh, she never doubted my meme Lord status. Yeah. Well, when we first met, I was like, before I actually started making videos, you know, I was making a ton of memes trying to communicate the truth of the scriptures, right? And then that meme production slacked off because now I make videos all the time. So from time to time, I just got to remind her how I attracted her. So, all right, guys. Who's up to read next? We've got a couple of chapters left. Okay,
I'll take it.
Take it away, Wes.
Yes, sir. Genesis 44. Then Joseph instructed his steward, fill the men's sacks with as much food as they can carry, and put each one's silver in the mouth of his sack. Put my cup, the silver one, in the mouth of the youngest one's sack, right, Benjamin, along with the silver for his grain. So the steward did as Joseph had instructed. At daybreak, the men were sent on their way with their donkeys. They had not gone far from the city when Joseph had told his steward, pursue the men at once, and when you overtake them, ask, why have you repaid good with evil? Is this not the cup of my master the cup my master drinks from and uses for divination? What you have done is wicked. When the steward overtook them, he relayed these words to them. Why does my lord say these things? They asked. Your servants could not possibly do such a thing. We even brought back to you from the land of Canaan the silver we found in the mouths of our sacks. Why would we steal silver or gold from your master's house? I think that's what Joshua was referring to there, silver and gold. If any of your servants is found to have it, he must die, and the rest will become slaves of my lord. As you say, replied the steward, but only the one who is found with the cup will be my slave, and the rest of you shall be free of blame. So each one quickly lowered his sack to the ground and opened it. The steward searched, beginning with the oldest and ending with the youngest, and the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. Then they all tore their clothes, loaded their donkeys, and returned to the city. When Judah and his brothers arrived at Joseph's house, he was still there, and they fell to the ground before him. What is this deed you have done? Joseph declared. Do you not know that a man like me can surely divine the truth? What can we say to my lord? Judah replied. How can we plead? How can we justify ourselves? God has exposed the iniquity of your servants. We are now my Lord's slaves, both we and the one who was found with the cup. But Joseph replied, far be it from me to do this. The man who was found with the cup will be my slave. The rest of you may return to your father in peace. Then Judah approached Joseph and said, Sir, please let your servant speak personally to my Lord. Do not be angry with your servant, for you are equal to Pharaoh himself. My lord asked his servants, do you have a father or a brother? And we answered, we have an elderly father and a younger brother, the child of his old age. The boy's brother is dead. He is the only one of his mother's sons left, and his father loves him. Then you told your servants, bring him down to me so that I can see him for myself. So we said to my lord, the boy cannot leave his father. If we were to leave, his father would die. But you said to your servants, unless your younger brother comes down with you, you will not see my face again. Now, when we returned to your servant, my father, we relayed your words to him. Then our father said, go back and buy us some food. But we answered, we cannot go down there unless our younger brother goes with us. So if our younger brother is not with us, we can't see the man. And your servant, my father, said to us, you know that my wife bore me 2 sons. When one of them was gone, I said, surely he has been torn to pieces, and I have not seen him since. Now, if you also take this one from me and harm comes to him, you will bring my gray hair down to Sheol in sorrow. So if the boy is not with us when I return to your servant, and if my father, whose life is wrapped up in the boy's life, sees that the boy is not with us, he will die. Then your servants will have brought the gray hair of your servant, our father, down to Sheol in sorrow. Indeed, your servant guaranteed the boy's safety to my father, saying, if I do not return him to you, I will bear the guilt before you, my father, all my life. Now, please let your servant stay here as my lord's slave in place of the boy. Let him return with his brothers. For how can I go back to my father without the boy? I could not bear to see the misery that would overwhelm him.
Awesome.
Good
Thank you,
stuff.
brother.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is another. The plot is continuing to thicken here as Joseph continues to kind of troll his brothers in a way. They don't know it's him. He's still giving them a hard time. Now he's wanting to keep Benjamin, and Judah's like, I can't, man. I vowed for his safety. I can't. But we're going to get the resolution to all this here in chapter 45 next week. But guys, Josh, what was the first thoughts come to your mind from this chapter? Oh, you're on mute, brother.
I just couldn't imagine, when the brothers are leaving, they think everything's gone fine. They're like, okay, sweet. Everything's cool. Dad's going to be fine. Benjamin's coming back. We're good. We can show him that nothing happened. And then all of a sudden, somebody stole a cup. Oh, great. Here we go. Who the heck did it? And then it's Benjamin. It's like, oh, geez, oh, whiz. Like, I just can't imagine what the brothers felt in their heart, especially Reuben, I think. Yeah. Like in that moment, that would have been.
Yeah,
I can imagine they're saying it's because of what we did to Joseph.
Right.
That's true.
Simeon just got let out after a year, and then he's like, oh, we got to go back to this man. And because it was found in Benjamin's cup. Like, can you imagine their initial reaction on the road whenever this happened? And like, I just imagine Simeon kicked his donkey or something like this. He's like, I just got out of jail. Like, now I got to go back. Look what you're doing to me. And now they're probably, giving Benjamin weird looks. And yeah,
Benjamin's like, I didn't do it. I promise.
Right.
Sure you didn't.
Yeah, this is very interesting dynamic if this were a TV show or a movie.
Something that alarmed me or stood out was this, the cup was called a cup of divination.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So I had to look into that and look it up a little bit, right?
This comes up when we go through the Torah portion, right? You're like, what is that? What'd you find?
Well, the word nakash, translated there as divination, can also mean to learn by experience or diligently observe, right?
That's
to kind of like rightly divide, to understand,
to deduce,
right? Yeah. And so whereas we hear divination, we automatically think a practice of occult,
right.
that they're trying to use astrology or something to determine the future, but that might not be what's going on here, especially since Joseph is known as a righteous man, a follower of Yahweh. He's probably not practicing occult practices there like we would think. But that verse, or that same word, is also used in Genesis 30:27, when Laban said, Laban said, if now it pleases you, stay with me. I've divined that the Lord has blessed me on your account. So the same word nakash is used there as divine, just to mean I've understood, I've deduced. Yeah.
Yep. I figured it out, right? I pondered it, and I pondered and figured it out, deduced, concluded. That's why I would say in verse 15 of the same chapter, Joseph says, do you not know that a man like me can surely divine the truth, right? Like, I can figure out, I can deduce, I can understand, I can conclude, I can, it reminds me of Columbo, who had his little pipe, right? That's when he was dangerous, when he put that little pipe in, right? Because then he was about to figure out the case.
I was just about to say, what is the practical application of what that looks like? How can a cup be used to discern something? That's the cup he goes to sip on when he's
that's why he says, I use this to drink and to divine. Like, this is what I'm thinking, and I'm figuring stuff out. I got my coffee cup. This is mine, right? So for some people, those little physical devices help them with certain things.
He probably does it with his pinky up, really fashionable.
Yeah, with his new fancy Egyptian name. So anyway, that's great commentary there, brother. It doesn't mean that he's literally like, pulling out hairs of his servants and chopping up, the nails of chickens and putting them in and stirring them in some sort of little mixture. And, it's not like he's doing witchcraft. It's literally just a word that means to deduce or conclude or understand. Yeah. So it's interesting. So guys, for everyone following along at home, here in this chapter in 44, is Joseph instructed his servants to pack food into the brothers' satchels for their return home, but he also had his personal silver cup planted in Benjamin's satchel. After the brothers left the city, Joseph had his men pursue them and search for the silver cup. Joseph's men searched his brother's possessions and find the silver cup with Benjamin. This prompted their return to Joseph. Joseph took Benjamin as his slave, and Judah pleaded with Joseph on behalf of Jacob to release Benjamin. How interesting this conversation, that they continue to bring up this father who's not there, that these sons keep saying, we care about our father. We care about our father. Don't do this to us. We care about our father. Even to the point where now Judah is saying, look, take my life instead of Benjamin's for the sake of my father. Like, he will die if you take Benjamin and not me. So what an interesting, and they said he loves the boy. His whole life is wrapped up in the boy, right? So this definitely reminds me of, when you see that love child that happens. You guys know what it means when you have a love child? So it means like later in your life, you've had all your kids, but then like 15 years later, you have another kid. They call it a love child because usually the wife gets pregnant on an anniversary, right? Like that 20-year anniversary or that 15-year anniversary. You've already had your kids several years earlier, but then later you have this romantic moment and you have a love child. It wasn't a planned child. It was a love child, right? So it just reminds me of like Benjamin's the last kid after 12 kids. And it's with, his Rachel died giving birth to Benjamin. So and this is at the later point of his life. He's really, really, he has a lot of emotions wrapped up in Benjamin for whatever reason.
Yeah, he's the baby.
Yeah. So all the other brothers noticed this to the point where they're like, look, for the sake of our father, just don't do this. Like, they really care about Jacob. So it's kind of sweet.
So one thing that I've wondered, do you think that Joseph was doing this as a way to kind of torment his brothers a little bit and get back at them? Or do you think he was doing it to try to see their heart as like, all right, do they really have compassion now? Or, I mean, maybe a combination of both, but.
Well, yeah, it says he did this to test them. And we're going to read about that later next week in chapter 45. But it also says that in Jubilees, after he realizes that they had solidarity with each other and that they did love Benjamin, then he decides to reveal himself. So it was both, actually, what you're saying, to both kind of play with him a little bit in his position of power, and then also to truly see where their hearts were. And then we're about to read here in the Testament of Simeon how Simeon viewed his imprisonment for that year and what was going through in his mind. So before we do that, guys, we got one of our companion passages here in the book of 1 Samuel. So Josh, would you like to read this chapter?
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right.
Then David fled from Noath in Ramah. He came to Jonathan and asked, "What have I done? What is my iniquity? Why have I sinned, or how have I sinned against your father that he wants to take my life?" "Far from it," Jonathan replied. "You will not die. Indeed, my father does nothing, great or small, without telling me. So why would he hide this matter from me? This cannot be true." But David again vowed, "Your father knows very well that I have found favor in your eyes." And he has said, "Jonathan must not know this, or he will be grieved. As surely as the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, there is but a step between me and death." Then Jonathan said to David, "Whatever you desire, I will do for you." So David told him, "Look, tomorrow is the new moon, and I am supposed to dine with the king. Instead, let me go and hide in the field until the third evening from now. If your father misses me at all, tell him David urgently requested my permission to hurry to Bethlehem, his hometown, because there is an annual sacrifice for his whole clan. If he says, 'Good,' then your servant is safe. But if he is enraged, you will know that he has evil intentions. Therefore, deal faithfully with your servant, for you have brought me into a covenant with you before the Lord. If there is iniquity in me, then kill me yourself. Why should you bring me to your father?" "Never," Jonathan replied. "If I ever found out that my father had evil intentions against you, would I not tell you?" Then David asked Jonathan, "Who will tell me if your father answers you harshly?" "Come," he replied, "let us go out to the field." So the two of them went out into the field, and Jonathan said, "By the Lord, the God of Israel, I will sound out my father by this time tomorrow or the next day. If he is favorable towards you, I will not send for you, and will I not send for you and tell you? But if my father intends to bring evil on you, then may the Lord punish me, and ever so severely, if I do not tell you and send you on your way in safety. May the Lord be with you, just as he has been with my father. And as long as I live, treat me with the Lord's loving devotion, that I may not die." Sorry about that. "And do not ever cut off your loving devotion from my household, and even when the Lord cuts off every one of David's enemies from the face of the earth." So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, "May the Lord hold David's enemies accountable." And Jonathan had David reaffirm his vow out of love for him, for Jonathan loved David as he loved himself. Then Jonathan said to David, "Tomorrow is the new moon, and you will be missed if your seat is empty. When you have stayed 3 days, hurry down to the place you hid on the day that hurry down to the place you hid on the day this trouble began, and remain beside the stone Ezel. I will shoot 3 arrows to the side of it, as if I were aiming at a target. Then I will send a boy and say, 'Go find the arrows.' Now if I expressly say to him, 'Look, the arrows are on the side of you, bring them,' then come, because as surely as the Lord lives, it is safe for you, and there is no danger. But if I say to the young man, 'Look, the arrows are beyond you,' then you must go, for the Lord has sent you away. And as for the matter you and I have discussed, the Lord is a witness between you and me forever." So David hid in the field, and when the new moon had come, the king sat down to eat. He sat in his usual place by the wall opposite Jonathan and besides Abner, but David's place was empty. Saul said nothing that day because he thought, "Something has happened to David to make him unclean. Surely he is unclean." But on the day after the new moon, the second day, David's place was still empty. And Saul asked his son Jonathan, "Why hasn't the son of Jesse come to eat the meal either yesterday or today?" Jonathan answered, "David urgently requested my permission to go to Bethlehem, saying, 'Please let me go, because our clan is holding a sacrifice in the city, and my brother has told me to be there. So now, if I have found favor in your eyes, please let me go and see my brothers.' That is why he did not come to the king's table." Then Saul's anger burned against Jonathan, and he said to him, you son of a perverse and rebellious woman. Do I not know that you have chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the disgrace of your mother who bore you? For as long as the son of Jesse lives on the earth, neither you nor your kingship shall be established. Now send for him and bring him to me, for he must surely die." "Why must he be put to death?" Jonathan replied. "What has he done?" Then Saul hurled his spear at Jonathan to kill him. So Jonathan knew that his father was determined to kill David. Jonathan got up from the table in fierce anger and did not eat any of the food that second day of the month, for he was grieved by his father's shameful treatment of David. In the morning, Jonathan went out to the field for the appointment with David, and a small boy was with him. He said to the boy, "Run and find the arrows. I will shoot." And as the boy ran, Jonathan shot an arrow beyond him. When the boy reached the place where Jonathan's arrow had fallen, Jonathan called to him, "Isn't the arrow beyond you?" Then Jonathan cried out, "Hurry, make haste, don't delay." So the boy picked up the arrows and returned to his master. But the boy did not know anything, only Jonathan and David knew the arrangement. Then Jonathan gave his equipment to the boy and said, "Go take it back to the city." When the young man had gone, David got up from the south side of the stone, fell face down and bowed 3 times. Then he and Jonathan kissed each other and wept together. Then David wept more. And Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, for the 2 of us have sworn in the name of the Lord, saying, 'May the Lord be a witness between you and me, and between your descendants and mine forever.'" Then David got up and departed, and Jonathan went back into the city.
All right. Thank you, brother. So this was quite an interesting chapter here. I truly feel like we'll see Jonathan in the kingdom. I think this dude had a good heart.
Could be.
I agree.
Yeah.
He had a whole like warning system instead of like doing bird calls, like caw. He was like, talking about the arrows.
Yeah, and David's like hiding behind this rock, which they actually gave the rock a name, Ezel. I thought that was hilarious. Like, what's up with this rock? It's like it's a special rock. He gets its own name that everybody knows. But then he's hiding behind this, and so like he's trusting that Jonathan is not going to like have a stray arrow go and hit him behind this rock, but instead go beside this rock. So it's kind of interesting. But what are you guys' thoughts?
Yeah, there's also some talk about the new moon celebration where it seems like to me, from what I can gather, what I can divine from this conversation, there is that there's a celebration for the new moon day that required the presence or that they would go to a temple, I think maybe for basically to do worship, right? There was a sacrifice being talked about, a covenant meal.
It's interesting, right? Because David, Saul is speculating that David's not there because he's unclean.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Just not because he's on some other mission or errand, but because he was unclean somehow. And from my understanding, I believe it was what would have, because apparently for those of you who are not familiar, we're going to talk about this here in just a minute, but the new moon was every 91 days, so the first of the quarter. But it looks like they're having a celebration for 3 days and not just 1 day. Did you guys pick that up?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's why he was like, why hasn't he come to this meal yesterday or today? So we know that the new moon is only 1 day, but for whatever reason, Saul is having some sort of 3-day get together. And I don't understand the backstory on that. So if anyone has any thoughts in the comments or the chat, or if you guys have any thoughts, let me know.
Maybe they just planned a get together for that 3 days since they were going to be in town or something.
Well,
I'm not sure.
Isn't a new moon like you don't know exactly what day it's going to fall on? Maybe I'm mistaken or thinking it's something else.
Well, we're actually going to be talking about that here in a minute, but with our next special segment. But they are having this festival there, and it seems as if you needed to be clean to be there. At least that was Saul's understanding. So that's where it doesn't specifically say it in the text, but I'm leaning towards what West Blaze is suggesting, which is it's almost as if they're having this, and this is like an officially sanctioned event where you had to be clean to show up, which means you would have had to gone to the doorway to the tent of meeting and eat your sacrifice that's brought before and have the priest prepare it for you, and you had to be clean.
Which how can you do if it's a work day where you got to be at your job? We'll talk about it.
Yeah, so we'll discuss this idea of what the new moon was, because a lot of people aren't familiar with it. But ultimately, I think that this whole event is kind of it's sad and it's encouraging, right? That this friendship aspect is, for a long time, David was this military commander that was in the household of Saul, doing well for him, going out and being entrusted to go out and fight battles for him. And he made this friendship with with Jonathan along the way. And then now he's trying to tell Jonathan, hey, your dad's trying to kill me. And Jonathan's like, no, man, he loves you. What are you talking about? He's like,
No way.
what? So just as in Joseph is devising this little orchestrated and manipulated circumstances in order to see the heart of his brothers, in like fashion, David is suggesting this little scenario so Jonathan can see the true heart of Saul, his father. And boy, does that get revealed. Like he tries to throw a spear at his own son.
I was trying to think about that. Like, how big was that room that Jonathan was able to notice it, like, and move out of the way in time, right? I mean,
yeah,
he's a whiz.
Yeah. So whatever this is, I don't know where this is, what kind of eating hall this is, but he had a spear with him, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's like throwing it at his own son. Like and then it says Jonathan got up angry. I'm like, well, yeah, you'd get up angry. Like your dad just tried to kill you at dinner. So this is clearly a dysfunctional household. I mean, Saul even brings his mother into it. He's like, your mother's a horrible woman, and this is why you're choosing David over me. And you're like, what is going on with this family? Remember, guys, this is the same King Saul that killed 80 Levite priests. That's how wicked this guy had become over time. He was definitely not doing the ways of Yahweh. This is why Samuel refused to even see him anymore. The prophet Samuel wouldn't even go see Saul after a certain point because he was like, yeah, I'm done with you. Wash my hands of you. Let the Lord deal with you as he may. And then, so this Saul character was pretty rough, but his duplicity was discovered in this moment by his own son, because Jonathan just had this kind of like, naivety about what was going on between David and his father. So David has to figure out a way to get Jonathan to understand, like, look, your dad's heart is not what you think it is, and I'm going to show you. So it's pretty interesting. Any other? We're going to go into our special segment here in a minute after I read the summary. But any other thoughts on this chapter, guys? No,
sir.
All right. So here it's 1 Samuel 20. For those of you following along at the house, guys, while fleeing from Saul, David goes to Jonathan, Saul's son, to ask why Saul is trying to kill him. Jonathan didn't believe his father would hurt David, so David suggests a way for Jonathan to test Saul's feelings of hatred toward David at the new moon celebration meal. Once Saul realized David was present for the meal, it's a typo. David wasn't present for the meal. He asked Jonathan where David was and became outwardly angry toward Jonathan for covering for David's absence. Saul tells his son Jonathan that David must die. Jonathan questioned Saul as to why David must die, and Saul hurled a spear at him. Jonathan signaled to David by shooting arrows in the field as they agreed upon, letting him know Saul did want to kill him. So this begins David's furthering what's the word, like on the run. He furthering goes on the run after this, right? He was like, this is all being brought out amongst all the people at this celebration, that David, in the mind of Saul, David's an enemy. And so now David has to go on the run, gather his own forces. There's a whole, guys, I encourage you at the house to go and read the rest of 1 Samuel. There's an entire saga that goes on between David and Saul, because Saul has become apostate. Like he's went away from the ways of the behavior and the covenant of Yahweh. And he won't even take reproof or rebuke from Samuel the prophet, and definitely not even his own son. He can't even explain his anger. Instead, he has to throw a spear at his own son. Like that's pretty messed up.
It is.
So, yeah. But guys, this actually leads us into one of our other segments that we have. This is our Come Let Us Reason Together. All right, brothers. The question for today: is the new moon feast day also a Sabbath?
Well, let's define our terms, shall we?
Yes.
I'm actually curious about this one. I don't. I'm not sure here. So
Okay. Well, so the new moon feast days, I would define by Jubilee 6, specifically verses 23 through 28, where it recalls that they are the new moon of the 1st, 4th, 7th, and 10th months only. So there's 4 of them, contrary to popular belief. And then, yeah, so there was one account we saw that there was a sacrifice, worship, covenant meal going on that day, there in that time in Samuel. But then also there is Amos chapter 8, verse 4 through 5. It says, "Hear this, you who trample the needy to do away with the humble of the land, saying, when will the new moon be over, so that we may sell grain, and the Sabbath, that we may open the wheat market?" Basically, that suggests to me that the people there were saying that there's no commerce or no buying or selling, no occupational labor basically done on the new moon day.
That's
But
right.
we don't get a specific direct instruction for that, which makes it difficult and confusing.
It does make it difficult.
wasn't there something's problem? I feel like in Jubilees there was something about the new moons when Noah got off the boat.
That's what West Blaze was citing earlier from Jubilee 6, 23 through 28. Yep. And he goes into break down why he starts memorializing and celebrating the new moons, according to different things that had happened throughout the year he was on the boat, and when the flood started to when he got off the boat. And so that's why it's the 1st month, the 4th month, the 7th, and the 10th month. And it's every 91 days. Actually, I have a little chart here to show us that it's actually every 91 days. This is what's interesting about this cycle. And this is based off the 364-day calendar that Enoch and Jubilees give to us. This is a calendar that every 91 days there's an intercalary day, is what Enoch calls it. And it basically is the connecting day between the different seasons every 3 months.
One version of Enoch says that the year's 360 days plus the 4 intercalary days, right? So you got the Jubilees referring to them as separations, or what is it, divisions of the seasons.
That's right. Yeah, so this is the idea of the new moon, according to the 364 calendar, according to the book of Enoch and Jubilees. There is a discrepancy with this concept because of Judaism. Judaism has taken this idea and they've made it to be the head of the month, right? And so they declare that it's just every month that's considered the new moon. And so it confuses people because they think that, it's just the head of the month. But it does happen every 3 months on the first day of that following month. See what I'm saying? So it does happen at the beginning of a month. It's just not every 12 months. It's not 12 times. It's only 4 times. So that's why in this chapter that we read in 1 Samuel 20, it says it was the second day and some translations say even the second day of the month. And David still was not at the feast. And so because it's the first day, it would have been the actual celebration of the new moon. And I don't see, like Wes said, I don't see it specifically commanded as it's not included in Exodus 23, Leviticus 23, or Deuteronomy 16 as feast days, or even Numbers 28 and 29. It's not specifically mentioned it's inferred in Deuteronomy, I think, or Numbers 29, 6 and 7. but we're never told outright like the new moon is a Sabbath and this is how you celebrate it. But all these other verses that are in the scriptures, a few of which Wes mentioned, leads us to the conclusion that they did celebrate this as a Sabbath, that they didn't work. So what does that do for us today if we're trying to do the instructions that apply to us? It's a topic I'm still studying out, but my wife and I, we personally observe this day when we can. We try to remember it and line up the calendars, and we try to observe it when we can. So
4 times a year, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's definitely confusing too when you try to figure out, okay, so is this dependent on the phase of the moon, like many have been taught to understand? And I've reached the conclusion that it may have used to be, right, but it's definitely not anymore, according to understanding. Now, nobody can say we have the 100% correct calendar and we know how it's supposed to be. We're all practicing, right, awaiting the restoration and the resurrection where we can do it perfectly. But yeah, that's all I can think right now.
Yeah, it's like even right now as we talk about this, guys, there's someone in the live chat saying that these things don't apply to us because Jesus showed up. So this is this type of teaching that we've seen from folks that a lot of modern churches, right, that teach this dispensational theology. They've been told that the instructions throughout the law and the prophets were just for the Jews, and therefore particular feast like a new moon celebration would just be a Jewish feast. But it's funny because it's like people seem to forget, and a lot of the modern preachers that teach that kind of stuff seem to forget that Jesus was a Jew from the tribe of Judah. He's the king of Israel, the king of the covenant. And so we're under his authority and under his instruction. And as we become believers and disciples to Jesus, we are grafted into Israel, as Ephesians chapter 2, 8 through 11, and also Romans 10 and 11 explain to us. This is why Yeshua is gathering all nations to become part of Israel. So there is no separation. There is no Greek. They're Jew as disciples in Jesus, as Paul tells us, right? We all just do the behavior of Jesus. And these idea of taking a Sabbath day or a celebrated feast day that the Father and the Son said this was their system. Mm-hmm. This is why we practice these things.
I'll remind them also Isaiah 66 verse 23. It says that, and it shall be, and this is a prophecy about like the millennial reign, the kingdom to come, when you have the kingdom, the resurrection, Yeshua and the Father living amongst us, and there's all the mortal survivors of the nations that made it through the tribulation period, repopulating the earth outside of the kingdom. But this prophecy says that it shall be from new moon to new moon and from Sabbath to Sabbath that all mankind will come bow down before me, says the Lord. Right. All mankind, it says. So it's part of the kingdom behavior that we should have some joy in wanting to practice and wanting to get to learn, because we'll be doing it forever.
Right. And also, just as a quick admin thing for everyone in the chat and any of the moderators in the chat, we absolutely allow people to watch this broadcast who don't agree with what we're talking about and our commentary on the scriptures. But when they get to a point of condemning or accusing people in the chat or people in the broadcast, you're welcome to use the timeout button at that point, right? Because at that point, they've gotten to a place where they can't control themselves. So it's okay if they disagree, but to the point of condemning or accusing, go ahead and put them in timeout for the sake of peace in the chat. All right, guys. So the new moon, it's 4 times a year. It's very interesting, based specifically off the calendar that is no longer followed by hardly any of the world. So therefore, for the average Christian that's learning about, wait, why are they selling this new moon thing? Why, like Westblade said, Isaiah 66, why is all the world going to be celebrating this new moon thing when Yeshua returns? So what is this thing? So when people start to try to study it, that leads them into a calendar discussion. And that's like, it's a huge debate.
Considering too that many people have been taught that the Apostle Paul often rejects the idea in his letters that we should be, as Christians, that we should be keeping any of those instructions for the feasts and stuff. That they often point to Colossians 2, right, 16 through 17. No one is to act as your judge in regard to food or drink or respect of festival, new moon, or Sabbath day. People take that and they say, well, see, nobody can judge you as a new convert, as a Christian, a believer in the Most High God. You don't have to keep any of those commandments, and then don't let anybody judge you for that. Whereas I would put forth, he's saying the opposite. He's telling new converts, don't let the pagan Gentile nations around them judge them for now taking part in this behavior of God that he called eternal. It also says that they're a shadow of things to come, which is present tense when Paul said it, meaning that there's still things to come, that these things are a shadow of. The feast days are often a shadow of the kingdom.
So let me get this right. How does a shadow work? So does a shadow cast a reflection of a different thing?
No, or does it disappear when the thing that casts it actually shows up? Neither one of those are true. No.
I need that meme where all the calculations are happening.
That's right.
How do shadows work? So yeah, all right.
A small and local sun enclosed in a dome ceiling.
Right. Great point, brother. All right, guys. That was our Let Us Reason Together segment. We really appreciate you guys' thoughts on that. And we're going to jump into our last companion passage here in the Testament of Simeon. I think it was my turn to read. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I'm going to take chapter 4, and we'll get started with this here. It says, the Testament of Simeon, verses chapter 4, 1-5. And my father asked concerning me, because he saw that I was sad. And I said to him, I am pained in my liver, for I mourned more than they all, because I was guilty of the selling of Joseph. When we went down into Egypt and he bound me as a spy, I knew that I was suffering justly, and I grieved not. Now Joseph was a good man and had the Spirit of God within him, being compassionate and pitiful. He bore no malice against me, but loved me even as the rest of his brethren. Beware, therefore, my children, of all jealousy and envy, and walk in the singleness of soul and with a good heart, keeping in mind Joseph your father's brother, that God may give you also grace and glory and blessing upon your heads, even as you saw in Joseph's case. All his days he reproached us not concerning this thing, but loved us as his own soul, and beyond his own sons glorified us, and gave us riches and cattle and fruits. Do you also, my children, love each other, one his brother with a good heart, and the spirit of envy will withdraw from you. For this makes savage the soul and destroys the body. It causes anger and war in the mind, and stirs up unto deeds of blood, and leads the mind into frenzy, and suffers not prudence to act in men. Moreover, it takes away sleep, and causes tumult to the soul and trembling to the body. For even in sleep does some malicious jealousy, deluding him, gnaws, and with wicked spirits disturbs his soul, and causes the body to be troubled, and wakes the mind from sleep in confusion. And as a wicked and poisonous spirit, so it appears to men. This is chapter 4 of the Testament of Simeon. Testament of Simeon, for everyone watching, is part of the Testament of 12 Patriarchs, and it is ancient Hebrew literature that was put in some canons. Parts of it was found amongst the Dead Sea Scrolls. So, guys, thoughts? What did we just read here?
Well, I can tell you, for me personally, when I read it the first time, it was quite convicting. I know I've struggled with sleep problems before, and my background is I'm in marketing and sales, right? And I mean, like, almost the goal of marketing is to get people envious of stuff so they take action sometimes and make a purchase. And it's really difficult in our consumer type society these days to not see people that have things that we don't have, and statuses that we want, or situations that we want to get out of, or anything like that, and be envious of that. And if you just take the scripture at its practical, literal meaning, when I see stuff where it's like it causes you to have these bad thoughts and to lose sleep and all this stuff, I'm like, gosh, is that part of the reasons why I have trouble sleeping sometimes? Like, am I envious of something? And so I just was praying. I was like, Lord, if this is the case, like, show this to me. I don't want to act that out. But I think we become so accustomed to just looking at other people as in a better situation, or I don't know how to put into words right now, but that we don't call it envy anymore. No. We're just like, oh no, we're just, so-and-so's, it must be nice. The privilege, right? Yeah. That we talk about today.
Yeah. It's a form of coveting. Yeah. It's a form of coveting. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I just wonder, like, how much that is a root of some of the sleep challenge. I mean, gosh, how many prescription medicines are out there to help people sleep, right? It's crazy. So I was convicted personally when I read it.
Yeah. It's always something I thought growing up, because when I first became a believer, in the following like 5 years, I found myself in a certain environment, in a certain place, where I was attending a lot of churches that had that prosperity doctrine, right? Where they were talking about, you'd be blessed, do this, blessed in the city, blessed. They're misquoting things out of context to push a point that you'll be financially prosperous if you're serving Jesus, right? And while there is blessing of finance in the law of God for good behavior, it doesn't mean you're going to have it. You can't just make it happen at will. Like, you have to put in your obedient time, and you have to build things in your life. And there's a process involved that requires your application, not just your shouting it into existence. And so I remember thinking to myself after getting out of one of the, and I was talking to my roommate about it at the time. We got out of church one day, and I said to him, I was like, man, why don't they ever talk about coveting? Because that would always come to my mind when I'm hearing these sermons. And I'm like, all right, so I'm told to write down what kind of car I want, and tell the Father that I'm going to claim this, and I'm going to name this in the authority and the power of God, because I'm blessed. And I'm sitting there going, like, where do you draw the line with straight up coveting the ways of the things of the world? I always remember that, Matthew 6:33, but the pagans chase after these things, so seek first the kingdom of God, and he'll give you all these things. So I was like, should I really be trying to ask God for a car, or a specific type of expensive car? You know what I mean? When I've got a car that works, and in fact, actually at the time I had a motorcycle, so it's like, I was good. I was fine. I could get to work and back. Girls like the motorcycle. I was fine, but I didn't need a Lexus, right? I didn't need something more expensive, but yet I'm being taught in my head. And I just remember I was being taught by these types of sermons in my head to ask for that, to think about that, and then request that, and then claim that, because I was blessed. And I just remember talking to my roommate, being like, why don't they ever hear sermons about coveting? And I was kind of like naively asking this, not realizing that would have completely disrupted the whole premise of the sermon I did just here. So I agree with you, Josh. It's like, it is something that in a lot of churches it's overlooked, this idea of what does it mean to envy and strife with jealousy, because he mentions jealousy and envy in the same regard in these chapters.
I've always understood it to be more specific about desiring something that someone else has, that belongs to someone else.
Yeah.
But I can see how it can bleed over into just, wanting to covet the things of the world and luxury, and, more than you need. And it wouldn't be denying yourself.
Yeah. And Simeon's trying to tell us here that it turns into rage and anger, sleeplessness, blood deeds.
Would you bring it back up where it says wicked spirits? Is it implying that kind of behavior attracts wicked spirits, disturb his soul?
I wouldn't doubt it.
Yeah, or in verse 7 there it says, a good do you also, my children, love one another, his brother, with a good heart, and the spirit of envy will withdraw from you.
Was it verse 7 you're thinking of? Or
that's what he was just referring to. I was talking about verse 9.
Yeah.
With wicked spirits disturbs his soul.
Yeah, as a wicked and poisonous spirit, so it appears to men, and then with wicked spirits disturbs his soul. Yeah. So, I mean, we know that it's the unclean spirits afflict, attack, oppress, and destroy mankind, and tempt them into unrighteous behavior. That's why they were created. So I wouldn't put it past this concept, right? So if this becomes consuming in your mind, the jealousy and the envy, then it's an actual spirit of envy. I wouldn't doubt it. So in fact, I wonder if that's, I'm trying to remember the Screw Tape Letters by C.S. Lewis. I can't remember if he included that in his dialogue, because he was talking about all different types of spirits and how they would come up to Wormwood, and how they would talk about their mission and how they were doing, and like how they were tempting mankind and stuff. And so it's a fiction, but it's interesting but yeah, I wouldn't put it past all the unclean spirits to have their own little assignment of like what type of behavior they're going to try to go tempt mankind to do. Like that's their little segmented department.
That 10%, they needed to be managed somehow, right? They needed to be directed in certain directions to fulfill the cause of their leader.
That's right. That's right. There's organization, like Yeshua says, a house divided against the sand can't stand. So in every house, there's a household manager. That organization was needed, and Satan oversees the unclean spirits as their manager. So, but here Simeon is explaining how he grieved Joseph more than his brothers because of his guilt, to the point that Jacob noticed. And it's interesting to me that he mentioned, because he claims to be guilty of the one selling Joseph. But in previous chapters, both in Jubilees and Genesis, it seems to be that Judah was the one that sold him. So it's kind of an interesting thing here. And then, of course, in the Testament of Gad, Gad is saying that he and Simeon wanted to kill Joseph. And then it was, I believe, Judah that was kind of brought up the idea of selling him. And I think I'm misquoting this slightly, but point is there was this, like, it was a fluid situation, right? Like initially they wanted to kill him, so they throw him in the well. Instead, they could have just straight taken him and killed him that moment. They didn't have to throw him in a well. Clearly, the whole act of him throwing him in the well was so they could think about it further. They weren't completely made up their mind. Or at that moment, Reuben had already tried to like finagle the situation so that they didn't kill him immediately and could think about it for a minute. And so this is where they threw him in the well. And before Reuben gets back, it seems as if Gad, Simeon, and Judah had already figured out we're going to sell him. So
yeah.
It's kind of
whereas he didn't actually, they didn't actually kill him. So what did happen was he got sold, and so Simeon's just expressing remorse over the whole situation, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. He did really messed with him the most, it seems. Simeon instructed his sons and grandsons to avoid jealousy and envy as it leads to anger and murder. And then I think that's fascinating. And then Simeon revealed how once they arrived in Egypt and lived in Goshen, Joseph never said anything about the brothers' actions of selling him into slavery. And that is what we've talked about in previous portions about how love covers a multitude of sins. Yeah. Right. It's just so beautiful.
He never admonishes them or rebukes them necessarily. He gives them that little bit of hard time with the, with the cup and talking about making them slaves and making them come back with Benjamin. But he doesn't ever, just lay into them like he could have.
I just imagine like one of those movie scenes, right, where it's like, Joseph is standing there with his amazing entourage and his regalia, and he's dressed up in
Technicolor dream coat.
Yeah, exactly. So he's sitting there just completely, just dressed up as this incredible authority figure in Egypt, and Simeon and his brothers come up to him, and they're like, "Hey, we just really want to apologize. Please don't tell Jacob about what happened. We just really want to apologize." And he just smiles at him. And he's like, Did you guys see that back acreage, where of that land I gave you? That's a great place to go. Those sheep to go graze. I would really encourage, you guys checking out that back acreage. Like he completely just ignores it, just smiles at him, just keeps going like nothing happened.
Yeah.
You
see what God's blessed me with? No
yeah. you see all this in the back behind me? You have the Heliopolis. You see this incredibly large structure of Heliopolis that I rule over, and all the whole land of Egypt, and how the whole world's coming to us now. Like, guys, let's just focus on the good right now. Like what an amazing dude this Joseph turns out to be. Simeon also explained how loving your brethren with a good heart will cause the poisonous spirit of envy to withdraw from you. Seems like a simple statement, but this is one of the most difficult things I've seen for believers to practice. Is just to love your brethren with a good heart, so that strife, jealousy, and envy will not rule the day. Why Paul even has to say, hey, if there's a man that's contentious, warn him once, but if he continues to be that way, have nothing to do with him. Because there's striving jealousies that cause contention and argumentation amongst the brethren that is just pointless and needless. And this is one of the most difficult lessons for believers to learn. We see with the disciples of Jesus, right? They come up to him and they're like arguing about who's going to be at his right hand when he comes in his authority and power, And they're mad because the sons of Zebedee, their mother went to Jesus and tried to get them that top spot. And they're all like arguing and mad amongst each other. And Jesus is like, guys, just wash feet and shut up. Like he's just like, he's just be like, what are you guys talking about? Like, I'm training you to be a servant to all, not to be some tyrannical ruler over people. Like, that's not the spot that you should desire. Desire to be the guy with the basin of water washing feet. Like, that's what I've been trying to tell you this whole time.
The least will be greatest.
Yeah.
The humble will be blessed.
Yeah. The
meek inherit the earth. Yeah.
The Testament of the 12 Patriarchs, and like we're reading here on screen, Testament of Simeon, just for those who may be unfamiliar, the whole premise of these testaments is that each of the sons of Jacob is talking to their sons and grandsons on their deathbed and telling them, hey, here's the ways of Yahweh, do these. And here's how I didn't do these at different points in my life, and I learned my lesson. So here at the end of my life, I realized that was what I should have done. And then I tried to course correct throughout my life, and it went well with me. Do the ways of Yahweh, do the commandments of the Lord, right? And then this is that general instruction, right, that he's telling all his kids. And this is why these testaments are just so powerful.
It really is. I'd love to add one more testament of Joseph, a few verses from chapter 1, if I could.
Sure, brother, go ahead.
Joseph says, I have seen in my life envy and death, yet I went not astray. but preserved in the truth of the Lord. These my brethren hated me, but the Lord loved me. They wished to slay me, but the God of my fathers guarded me. They let me down into a pit, and the Most High brought me up again. I was sold into slavery, and the Lord of all made me free. I was taken into captivity, and his strong hands succored me. I was beset with hunger, and the Lord himself nourished me. I was alone, and God comforted me. I was sick, and the Lord visited me. I was in prison, and my God showed favor unto me, in bonds, and he released me. What does that sound like? Matthew 25, sheep and goats judgment, doesn't it?
It does.
The behavior of God slandered, and he pleaded my cause, bitterly spoken against by the Egyptians, and he delivered me, envied by my fellow slaves, and he exalted me.
It's amazing.
Powerful.
It truly is. So good. So good. We got two quick little chapters to the rest of this. And I think, who's up next? Josh?
Yep.
Or Wes Place? Are you up next?
It's my turn. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, brother. Chapter 5 of the Testament of Simeon.
Okay. Therefore was Joseph comely in appearance and goodly to look upon, because no wickedness dwelt in him. For some of the trouble of the spirit, the face manifests. And now, my children, make your hearts good before the Lord, and your ways straight before men, and you shall find grace before the Lord and men. Beware therefore of fornication, for fornication is the mother of all evils, separating from God and bringing near to Beliar. It's another name for the Satan character. For I have seen it inscribed in the writing of Enoch, that your sons shall be corrupted in fornication, and shall do harm to the sons of Levi with the sword. But they shall not be able to withstand Levi, for he shall wage the war of the Lord, and shall conquer all your hosts, and they shall be few in number, divided in Levi and Judah, and there shall be none of you for sovereignty, even as also our father prophesied in his blessings. Woo! Couple things there.
Yeah. This is an interesting little short chapter. Josh, what were your thoughts, brother?
I love the face reflects a troubled spirit. I was just kind of perplexed by because you can kind of notice hey, is everything okay? Like you notice that when something's wrong with somebody. And I
kind of like the angel.
What's that?
Kind of like the angel in Genesis 4 said to Abel, why is your countenance downcast? If you not do what's right, will you not go well with you?
Yeah. And I came from such a dispensation background that you had to make everything metaphors or allegory or all this stuff. And now that I'm just reading scripture for what it says, it's so practical. Like it's so awesome to just see the obvious basic interpretation of what it says. And to see that you can verify it. Like that's reality.
Amen.
So, yeah. I love that.
Yeah. Simeon, he also instructs his sons and grandsons to make their hearts good and behavior like Yahweh's. So I think that's interesting because that's like an active command, right? It's like you make it so, right? Like Jean-Luc Picard, right? Captain of the Enterprise tells his first mate, make it so, full speed ahead, right? He's like, you make it happen. Or sorry for the Star Trek reference. Anyone out there might like that, but either way, for the Trekkies, just know that they had to make it so to travel across their fake universe. And so this is where we have to make it so in our life. We have to go after it ourselves. It can't just be a passive thing that happens to you because you go to church or because you claim to be a Christian. Like my wife says that there's kainos, Christians in name only. So like you can't just, you got to make it so. You got to make it a reality in your life and adopt the behavior of Yahweh on an active basis every day so that not only you find favor with God, but also with men. This is the promise of the covenant. And this is what we see happening in Joseph's life, that his brothers are witnessing this happen as well. So
it reminds me of James 4 when it's talking about, let me get there real quick here. Submit to God, moreover, take a stand against the adversary, and he will flee from you. Like, come close to God, and he will come close to you. Clean your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts. Like, there's actions we have to take in order to make that happen. So when you say, make it so, for the longest time, I would be like, oh, Lord, I need you to do this for me. And he's like, you got to initiate this process. And so
That's
I
right.
like just clear, straightforward instructions.
Yeah, that's right. And so likewise, while you're making it so, things are that the enemy is going to try to tempt you. So Simeon goes on to try to warn his children and grandchildren, avoid fornication. It's the mother of all evils. So that's just, I don't know why that sounds like such a hilarious statement to me. I feel like that should just be like on the side of a big bomb, at the bottom of an airplane, right? Just like, I don't know. It just seems like
Mother of all
hilarious. Like,
evils.
there's some joke there. I can't figure it out yet, but it seems hilarious to me. But
There's
yeah,
so much spiritual warfare being talked about
yes.
all throughout all these testaments, right? Testament of Dan 5:1, observe, my children, the commandments of the Lord, keep his law, depart from wrath, hate lying, that the Lord may dwell among you, and Beliar may flee from you. Testament of Benjamin again, if you do well, even unclean spirits will flee from you. Testament of Simeon, for if a man flee to the Lord, the evil spirit runs away from him, and his mind is lightened. It's almost like James was quoting these guys.
That's right.
It doesn't. Sorry, I'm recalling something. Isn't there in the Testament of Job, after Satan tries so hard, doesn't it kind of like show a moment where Satan kind of like cries like, "Oh my gosh, you won't break. What the heck? I've tried everything and you won't stop." It's almost like they're like sort of like, I've tried everything I can try. You're not going to do it, so I'm going to quit wasting my time.
Yeah, they eventually run away, huh?
Yeah, and so that's where we need to have that patience and that endurance. Like, no, I'm not going to give into this. Like, if you're not that's why I like understanding the spiritual aspect of it, because if you're not aware that's what's happening, then you can kind of be confused. Whereas if you know, like, listen, these spirits are trying to win. Same thing in Genesis 4, like you said, sin wants you, but you've got to fight against it. If you know that's kind of what's happening, it almost kind of gives you strength. Like, you're not going to win. No, I'm fighting. We're not giving up here, because I have to imagine that was extremely satisfying for Job to see Satan just like, why won't you give up? I've tried everything. So I just think that's an interesting, like, that seems like that's what it's talking about right here with what'll happen with the spirits.
Yeah. They're going to, stick to righteousness. They'll flee from you. Just in the modern vernacular, we would just say, not today, Satan. Right.
Yeah.
I ain't the one, not today. But back then they're like, look, flee fornication, flee envy, flee strife, like 1 Timothy 7, how can a young man keep his way pure? I'm going to flee from sexual immorality. I'm going to flee. It is extremely, like, especially with the men, obviously Simeon, I'm sure he has some granddaughters in there, some daughters and granddaughters, but especially with the young men, causes a lot of issues when you're chasing women. Mm-hmm. So, or when you're letting the women come after you and you have no safeguard, right? You have no resistance, I should say. So like, this is Joseph, obviously, clearly he figured this out, right? He had this amazing sense of chastity to repel the adulterous woman, and not to just go out with the other single Egyptian women, right? So he was just trying to stay chaste until he got a wife. I failed that test in life. I wish I had not failed that test in life, but I did. So I was, I had problems when I was younger. And so this is just a good, Simeon also, all the brothers also saw Joseph's righteous character and behavior while he was in Egypt during this whole time doing this. And now they've learned their own lessons in their lives. In fact, without doing a deep dive into Simeon himself, in the book of Jubilees, it talks about how he took a wrong wife at one point, and then he repented, and then he took a different wife. So these guys all had their own issues as they were struggling to do covenant behavior. And so it was it's a learning process. And so here Simeon is learning and then teaching his sons not just the moral character of how you need to behave and adopt the ways of Yahweh and how it affects you, but then he also warns them ahead of time. I saw written in the writings of Enoch that you in the future will have problems with fornication, and it's going to cause a conflict with the tribe of Levi. And I think that this is interesting to me. This is really interesting.
And he says he read it in the writings of Enoch.
I couldn't find this in what we still have preserved, right, as First Enoch.
No, we see mentions of like the watchers and the fornication there, but never in direct reference to this. You're right. Yep. Yeah. The fragments were not preserved.
Yeah. Yeah. There is a span in Enoch in the latter chapters of 89, 90, where it has like a summation, if you will, of all the events of the sons of Jacob leading up to, the return, or leading up to certain big moments of history. and it's told in a parable fashion of like all of them being parabolized in animals, right? It's almost like, you know, George Orwell's Animal Farm book. It's hilarious, actually. So, but in that breakdown, there's nothing in there that would even remotely resemble what Simeon's saying here. So for all those watching and listening, guys, the current book of Enoch that we have, that's called First Enoch, here at Kingdom of Context, we don't give any weight, validity, or you know, we don't believe that second and third Enoch are legit, but First Enoch, lots of validation, and it's legit, and it is a collection of different scrolls over time that's compiled and called the book of First Enoch. And so they're all fragments of scrolls. It's not the complete books. So right. I couldn't find this in Enoch.
No, I think it was 4 other of these testaments, and the testaments of the 12 refer to the writings of Enoch as well. They were all familiar.
Yep. I know that it's mentioned like 5 times in the Testament of Levi, I believe. It's pretty crazy, especially it's or 3 times in the Greek translation, but in the Aramaic translation it's mentioned 5 times in the Testament of Levi. It's pretty interesting. But so yeah, it's Simeon is just trying to encourage his kids and grandkids. He says he shared with his tribe that they'll be diminished in number and spread between the inheritances of Levi and Judah, and never in a position of authority in Israel. And we see this fulfilled throughout the rest of the law and the prophets, specifically in Joshua chapter 19, verses 1 through 9, where it explains to you the inheritances that Simeon was given was actually in the territory of Judah around the cities of the Levites. So they didn't get their own sovereign territory. They're actually encompassed by Judah. So it's like Judah's watching over them in a sense, geographically, you know. So and they were, even though Judah was given the scepter of rulership and sovereignty, Simeon was never granted anything like that. So
no.
Yeah.
Remember, I forget which testament it was, but where they're being like given symbols almost.
Yes.
You know what I'm talking about? Where like Asher, the sun, I want to say Gad, the moon, that type of thing. And for Joseph, it says mountains. And I just thought that was cool. It's like mountains is usually like symbolic of or synonymous with kingdoms.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe there's some symbology there.
Possibly. Especially if and because there's another in the Testament, I can't remember which one it is. I think it's in the Testament of Reuben. He talks about how he mentions 4 of the brothers, and Joseph is included in that leadership of the 4 brothers. So with Levi, Reuben, or Levi, Judah, Joseph, and I can't remember somebody else, but yeah, there's like out of the 12, 4 of them seem to be given a sense of weight, and Joseph was included in that. So, Josh, we have 1 chapter left, chapter 6 of the Testament of Simeon. You want this one?
Let's get it.
All right, brother.
Behold, I have told you all things that I may be acquitted of your sin. Now, if you remove from you your envy and all stiff-neckedness, as a rose shall my bones flourish in Israel, and as a lily my flesh in Jacob. And my odor shall be as the odor of Libanus, and as cedars shall holy ones be multiplied from me forever, and their branches shall stretch out afar off. Then shall perish the seed of Canaan, and a remnant shall not be unto Amalek, and all the Cappadocians shall perish, and all the Hittites shall be utterly destroyed. Then shall fail the land of Ham, and all the people shall perish. Then shall all the earth rest from trouble, and all the world under heaven from war. Then the mighty one of Israel shall glorify Shem, for the Lord God shall appear on earth, and himself save men. Then shall all the spirits of deceit be given to be trodden under foot, and men shall rule over wicked spirits. Then shall I arise in joy, and will bless the Most High, because of the marvelous works, because God has taken a body, and eaten with men, and saved men. Amen.
Thank you, brother.
Wait. God has taken a body? It's not the Father, right?
What does this mean? Oh, my goodness.
No. Elohim.
It
in the
seems
Hebrew,
like
right?
they definitely knew about the resurrection and the prophecies of Christ and things to come.
Right?
And they understood
I
the
love
proper
that.
definitions. Go ahead.
Yes, yeah, that's why in verse 1, in there's a distinction here I don't think a lot of people realize. It's the mighty one of Israel shall glorify Shem, for the Lord God. That's a term for the Adonai Elohim, the ruler Elohim, the ruler God shall appear on earth and himself save men. This is fulfilled in the Son of God. This is the story of the prophets, right? The testimony of the Messiah. And that's why in verse 7, it would go on to say, the Most High, I shall arise in joy and bless the Most High. That's the Almighty, because of his marvelous works. And this is made possible because Elohim has taken a body and eaten with men and saved men. That's, again, the story of the Son of God that sent, not the Father himself. So, yeah, this is another example of what does this word God mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's, you know, you have seen me do debates with Trinitarians, and that's what it always comes down to, is just the simple definition of this one word. It keeps us from so much confusion, right? The Most High, that's a consistent term always used for the Almighty, for Yahweh, the Father. He's the Most High. It's literally what the term means, right? There can be no other above him. But when we start using this G word, G-O-D, people get so confused. And they're like, oh my God, that must mean the Most High, right?
Yeah.
Right.
They forget that it's just a title that's,
Yeah.
you know, that's the
Well,
angels are called that. Moses and Aaron are referred to as gods.
Yeah.
The phrase "one true God," I think, trips people up with that.
Yeah, but who said that phrase?
In Revelation?
Jesus in John 17:3. Says
Which
that
says,
they may know that you are the one true God, speaking of his Father.
Mm.
Right. So the word just means ruler. So so if you take it in that capacity, you are the one true ruler. That's why he's called the Most High, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's most highest, means the whole term of being the one that's high is someone in rulership over everybody else. Yes, there is a physical, geographical, positional location meaning as well. But as far as in sense of rulership, you know, Pharaoh was most high over Egypt, right? He was the ultimate ruler. That's why it says he put Joseph second under Pharaoh. So in heaven, Yahweh is most high over everything, every other ruler and principality in heaven. Yahweh is the Almighty, and his Son is also a ruler in heaven, as Yeshua tells us in John chapter 8:38 or 18:38, that he's King of heaven. But his Father is still over him, just like an emperor has kings underneath him. You see what I'm saying? So like this is hierarchy, the structure of hierarchy. So this is why you can have this word Elohim used of the Messiah, of the Son of God, to be sent as the Messiah in the flesh, John 1:14, right? He dwelt, the word became flesh and dwelt among us. So this is why in Psalm 45, 6, and 7, it's saying that Yahweh, or God, is saying of Yeshua that his God anointed him with the oil of gladness and put him over his fellow brethren. So
yeah. Whereas the Most High doesn't have a God or a Father above him. Right. He would never say, my God. You know, Yeshua can, because he is the Son, not the Father.
That's right.
Doesn't when Yeshua is getting ready to be crucified, it says, I go back to your God and my God?
John 20:17, I send to my Father and your Father, my God and your God.
That's right. Yeah. So the people get really tripped up. They don't take the definition of the word God. So they'll pull up Isaiah 9:6 and they'll say, see, look, it says mighty God, Father, Prince of Peace. And you're like, all right, well, those are terms for rulership. Joseph, and we're going to read and next week, Genesis 45, he's called father to Pharaoh. He's a ruler, right? Someone that is in the authority position. That's what they would call a father. So this is, you know, I guess some of it maybe is just lost in the culture of the past, right? We don't understand how they use these terms like Adonai, like Lord, like a ruler or an Elohim or a God over the people. We conflate it with our modern understanding to think it must always be talking about the creator of heaven and earth, Yahweh himself.
Sorry, go ahead, Wes, please.
I was just going to say, for anybody else that would like to understand more about this and is confused about it, this channel right here, Kingdom in Context, you're watching this on, has a great playlist called Son of the Father, #Son of the Father. There's some cool morning cup of context presentations, which, Sean, if you would, I'd recommend adding the Isaiah 9:6 video to that playlist, because it's not in there. But the Isaiah 9:6, you know, is Jesus the Father is the title of that video, is another good one for this topic.
Well, and I was always curious, correct me if I'm wrong, but the word Elohim, can't that be like referring to angels? And isn't that more like a spirit being, or does Elohim mean ruler? I thought Lord meant like ruler, but is Elohim just ruler, or?
It has several definitions in the Strong's Concordance, at least. Elohim means ruler or divine spirit being, like a spirit kind. Sometimes it's used in reference to like a classification of entity, whereas you have human, made of mortal flesh, blood, dirt of the earth, and Elohim are made of water and spirit, heavenly beings. So angels, the Son, the Father. We even see the unclean spirits being called as false Elohim, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. false gods, little, and that's where, like in this passage here, the translator can trip you up because they'll decide, what they want to capitalize, right? So in this, in verse 7, it capitalizes the Most High and also capitalizes the use of the God word, God. So you then start to think it's the same thing. But this is why we're always talking about definitions of words here on Kingdom of Context. And guys, I just want to shout out to everyone watching our channel that supports us throughout these last 4 years. Guys, today is the 4-year anniversary of Kingdom of Context. Thank you so much, everybody, for supporting us, for sharing our videos, for giving us a chance to go through the scriptures with you. And for as many of you that have seen me debate Trinitarians on this topic in the last 4 years, talking about this God word, you know how difficult it is to make the definitions of words attractive. So that has been the greatest challenge of this channel. It's not cool. It's not sexy. It's not appealing. It's not clickbait for me to say, oh, that's an interesting argument. Can we look at the definition of that word?
It's freeing for me. I don't feel trapped in the confusion of the ambiguity of what words may or may not mean according to who you're talking to. I like knowing the foundation and the absolutes.
I agree. But unfortunately, not everybody is like that, right? Because for some people, when I say they're watching me debate somebody and they're like, oh man, he keeps, it sounds like they're just talking, they're just saying the same things in a different way. And I start to say, well, let's define that word real quick. It's like a spelling bee, right? Could you please use in a sentence? Can you define that word, please? Like nobody cares. Like nobody because this is the problem. Like this has not been my challenge. My personal challenge is like, how do I get people to care? Just take a moment and say, let's slow down and let's look at the definition of this word real quick, because it will solve so many problems, right? And this is a great example.
It's so much simpler when you just go off of, well, this is what it means, like the word begotten means brought forth, just very simple.
Or the definitions, like trying to understand the contextual use of the word day versus like a calendar day and a daytime. That's a semantic argument that confuses a lot of things too.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically this topic of the Trinity and that argument that people will say, that there's various forms of the Trinity conversation. And we realize that it is a long-standing conversation that goes all the way back to the 3rd century AD, that immediately became a point of contention of arguing over words and terms that then became theologically enforced by the rulers that ascended to power over the people that were believers in those days. And it became such a point of contention that they had that's literally why they had the Council of Nicaea, was to determine what are we going to do about this Trinity conversation. And they came to this Nicene Creed and this development of what they decided was going to be enforced as the terminology, when really everyone there was a believer in Yeshua. And it was just literally about how are we going to describe the nature of the Father and the Son with the right words. And then if you don't use these right words, you're not in the club anymore.
You're a heretic and you're excommunicated.
Like it's the dumbest thing in the world. It's this nonsense of just arguing over words that Paul tries to address in one of his letters. And so this is why when I stepped into this 4 years ago and I was like, all right, if I don't want to just, I don't feel as like I'm a preacher, right? So I don't know how to make some grand expository message be exciting. That's not me. So kind of a boring guy. So how do I make the Bible as appealing to the crowd as it is to my brain, even though my outward expressions don't always show it, right? So like inside I'm just doing cartwheels, thinking about the scriptures all day long because it's amazing to me. But because I've read it in context and looked up the definition of the words and suddenly it all makes sense. That's why it's so amazing to me. So like, how do I figure out a way to make this as amazing to the public? Mm-hmm. When I started to try to do videos and talk about it, the first thing I see is everyone wants just to argue about words. Everyone wants just to come in and say, well, you shouldn't say it like this. You shouldn't say that word or this word. So it just baffled me. Right. And then, so my initial drive in the first couple of years was, how do I have better conversations with people about topics that they disagree on? And how do I get better at encouraging them to look up the definition of the words without offending them? So unfortunately, I didn't do it all perfectly, and I'm still learning how to do it. So to everyone watching, super thanks if you're still here watching us after 4 years and you haven't already left because you're mad. Because I showed you that the Trinity doctrine doesn't make any sense and is not in Scripture, and it's just literally arguing over semantics. And this has caused strife, and it causes envy and strivings, and it causes unnecessary division in the body. And this is not how we love our brethren with a good heart. And this is what I really try to stress. So big thanks to everyone watching.
Absolutely. Yep, I've definitely learned that it's a important and meaningful thing to know and have the sense of security that who you're fellowshipping with, who you're discipling alongside of, who you're studying with, can be very influential in the things that you believe, and then the way that you go and talk to people about those beliefs. And it just makes me feel fortunate and blessed to know that there's people with a good heart out here like you with the ministry you have, and I've been blessed by it as well.
Appreciate you, brother. Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, guys, real quick, just to finish up real quick here in Testament Simeon 6, it says Simeon explained to his sons and grandsons that he told them this prophetic information so he cannot share in their guilt. I think this was hilarious. He was like, my hands are clean. I told you what's going to happen. You guys go follow the Lord and don't do this, but here's what's going to happen. And he said, be credited with warning them to avoid an evil heart and an evil behavior, and to do right behavior, so his tribe will be respected, and as many members of his tribe as possible might partake in the resurrection to eternal life. Just like we talked about in Acts 10 with Peter speaking to the people at Cornelius' household. All the prophets of the past knew this story. It's the same story, guys. Do the covenant, do the commandments. The Messiah is going to come in the flesh. He's the conduit, which was the Most High, will raise you to eternal life. That's the promise of the covenant.
And they were waiting for the first coming with, great anticipation, just like we're awaiting the second.
Amen. They surely were. Simeon revealed the future judgment of the Canaanites, the Amalekites, the Cappadocians, the Hittites, and even the land of Ham. So this is interesting how it kind of like took this little side tangent here where he's like talking about their heart and about doing the commandments, about the promise of the covenant and the eternal life. And then he suddenly talks about the judgment of rebellious people, nations around them that refuse the ways of Yahweh. This is also parroted in Jubilees chapter 22 with, I believe, Abraham on his deathbed is talking also about the promise of the future coming judgment of these nations that continue to reject the ways of Yahweh. And so this is just a little snippet of a couple tribes that get included by Simeon. He also explains how the Messiah of Israel will glorify the descendants of Shem. How interesting, guys, that he keeps using the concept of Shem. Why? Because Israel's his father, and it's not codified in the mind and in the vernacular of the people of the believers yet to be talking about being of Israel.
It's a priestly lineage.
So, well, yes, for sure. Like that would be right off the boat after Noah, Shem took over for sure. But I'm just saying that this is the blessing also told to us in Jubilees, is the blessing of Shem Noah and Abraham prayed that their descendants, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and everyone after them would partake in the same blessings of the covenant that Shem, all the way back to Shem, Noah, Enoch, Methuselah, who are all the people mentioned, Kenan, and then also Adam and Seth. Like they're all mentioned in this blessing that they all partake in, and that's what they pray for the future descendants of Israel to partake in as well. So here is Simeon repeating that same type of benediction, that same type of blessing. It's beautiful.
Yes, it is.
Also, he talks about how there's not going to be no longer will be any war in the earth because of what the Messiah accomplishes when he appears to save men. And this is directly connected to the resurrection. This didn't happen at his first coming.
Mm-hmm.
This is the promise of the Messiah. Just another reason why preterism should be thrown out immediately, guys. This is the fulfillment of the second coming, which is that there'll be no more war in the earth ever. Like it's done. You're done. And then unclean spirits will be destroyed. And Simeon himself, will be resurrected to eternal life. It's a part of the first resurrection. So it's just such a beautiful moment. All these wonderful qualifiers to let you know that our hope of glory is still ahead of us. The second coming is still going to happen. And he hasn't already shown up and then somehow mysteriously disappeared again. Like when he shows up on the earth, he's going to be here forever.
That's right.
So it's a good promise.
When he said it is finished on the cross, that did not mean that all was fulfilled. He's still going to come back. There's still a resurrection. There's still a kingdom to come, a millennial reign, so much to happen.
And he finished the obedience necessary to enter his priesthood. That's what was finished.
Yeah, it's such an interesting argument, right? Where they're like, oh, we don't have to do the laws of God anymore because Jesus said it's finished on the cross. I'm like, What? That was like literally a rant. He just says it's finished. That's all that's recorded. He doesn't say any context about that. How are you guys possibly linking those two together? And what's more, so now you're saying what, murder's okay? What is this, the purge? Like, what are you saying is available now? Like, are you serious? Think about what we're saying here. Are you saying that you can go fornicate with your mother-in-law now? Like, think about what the law of God was. And this is where we try to lovingly teach people the law of God, so you know that it's not finished. It's the behavior of the Father and the Son. What was finished was Yeshua's obedience to that point.
Mm-hmm.
So, which was more obedience than I could ever muster. So I'm glad that he did it.
Yes.
The purge. Sorry.
So yeah, so as soon as Jesus slumps his head, says it's finished, then that sound goes off. That would be hilarious dispensational parody. Oh, that'd be hilarious. The AD 33, the first purge.
That's how we make the definitions of words interesting to people.
That's our skit. We get a little Kingdom of Context production studio. That's the first skit we're doing. Jesus dies and the purge alarm goes off, and then everyone just starts going crazy. The law's over. Do what you want. Oh my goodness, guys.
It's eternal.
The silliness, and this is why the structure and the hierarchy that's been imposed within certain church systems doesn't allow people to question, right? So that's why we allow questions, we allow disagreement. Just be respectful about it, right? We want you to ask questions. We want you to share your thoughts and why you don't understand what we're saying, so we can show more scripture and explain it to you. Just be respectful about it. That's all we say. But guys, any last thoughts or concluding sentiments you want to share before we go?
Oh man, I'm always so blessed to be able to do this with you. I learned so much. I feel like a Sabbath has more fulfillment to be able to get to study and test the word with brothers of the faith. And so I appreciate both of you guys. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you for allowing me to participate as well. Appreciate it very much.
Yeah, awesome, guys. Thank you. Thank you for being here. It's so much fun to do this and study the word with you, sharpen each other, and everyone in the chat as well. We're here at 3 hours. We're not going to do Q&A today, but I'll be doing lots more videos, lots more opportunity for Q&A. Okay, guys. Thank you so much for everyone being here.
Investigating Babylon, part 21 on the 6th.
Yeah, buddy.
Yeah, that's right. We got that coming up in here in a few days. So be sure to check that out on our supplementary channel, Kingdom in Context.
Kingdom Cast.
Kingdom Cast. Go subscribe to that. Thank you. This is why I need help, guys. It's just too much. Too much for one person. Thank you guys for all being here. Hopefully it's a good Torah portion. Please join us next week.
Shabbat shalom, everybody. Much love.
Shabbat shalom.